back at it again with the amazing book. Continuing our reading of Cinder. Yeah, this book. I'll tell you what, I am hooked on this series. So much so that I've got the rest of them right here. So we're going all in. It's going to be a very, very extended series, but you know what? I'm all for it. Get myself comfortable here, and make sure you get yourself a snack or a drink, and make yourself comfortable. All right. Chapter 16. Night shift nurses and androids plastered themselves to the walls as Prince Kai barreled through the corridor. He had run all the way from his bedroom on the 16th floor of the palace's private wing, pausing to catch his breath only when he was forced to wait for the elevator. He burst through the door to the visiting room and came to a halt all at once, still gripping the door's handle. His mad eyes found Torin, arms crossed as he leaned against the far wall. The advisor tore his gaze from the glass window and met Prince Kai's panicked expression with one of resignation. "I heard," Kai started, pulling back his shoulders, wetting his dry mouth. He came into the room. The door clicked behind him. The small sitting room was lit only by a table lamp and the bright fluorescence in the quarantine. Kai peered into the sick room, just as a medroid pulled a white cloth over his father's closed eyes. His hammering heart plummeted. "I'm too late." Torn stirred. "It happened only moments ago," he said, forcing himself away from the wall. Kai took in the advisor's lined face and sleepless eyes and a cup of untouched tea that sat beside his port screen. He'd stayed late to work, rather than return to his own home, his own bed. The exhaustion caught up to Kai all at once, and he pressed his burning forehead against the cool glass. He should have been there too. "I will set up a press conference." Torin's voice was hollow. "A press conference?" "The country needs to know. We will mourn together." Torin seemed shaken for a rare moment. He covered it with a measured breath. Kai squeezed his eyes shut and chafed them with his fingers. Even knowing that it was coming, that his father was sick with his incurable disease, it still made no sense. All that had just been lost, taken so quickly. Not just his father, not just the Emperor. His youth, his freedom. "You will be a good Emperor," said Torin, "as he was." Kai flinched away from him. He did not want to think about it, all of his own inadequacies. He was too young, too stupid, too optimistic, too naive. He couldn't do this. The screen behind them pinged, followed by a sweetly feminine voice. "Incoming communication for Crown Prince Kato of the Eastern Commonwealth from Queen Lavana of Luna." Kai spun toward the net screen, blank, before a spinning globe in the corner, signaling an available comm. Any thread of tears vanished into an oncoming headache. The air thickened, but neither of them moved. "How could she know so soon?" said Kai. "She must have spies." From the corner of his eye, he saw Torin level a glare at him, a warning not to start in on the conspiracy theories just yet. "Perhaps the Thaumaturge or her guard saw you," he said, "running through the castle in the middle of the night. What else could it mean?" Locking his jaw, Kai drew himself to his full height, hailing the screen like an enemy. "I guess our mourning period is over," he murmured. "Screen, accept comm." The screen brightened. Kai bristled at the sight of the Lunar Queen, her head and shoulders draped in an ornate cream-colored veil, like a perpetual bride. All that could be seen beneath the shroud was a hint of long dark hair and the ghost of her features. The explanation told by the Lunars was that their queen's beauty was a gift not to be seen by undeserving earthens. But Kai had heard in reality the queen's glamour, Her ability to make people see her as divinely beautiful by manipulating their brainwaves could not translate over the net screens. Therefore, she never allowed herself to be seen over them. Whatever the reason, looking at the white-swathed figure for too long always made Kai's eyes sting. "My dear Regent," Lavanna said in a saccharine voice, "may I be the first to offer my condolences on the loss of your father, the good Emperor Raikon. May he forever rest in peace." Kai cast a cool glare at Torin. Spies. Torin did not return the look. "Though the occasion is tragic, I do look forward to continuing the talk of an alliance with you as the new leader of Earth's Eastern Commonwealth. As I see no reason to defer these conversations until your coronation, whensoever that shall be, I do think it appropriate to plan a meeting as soon as is convenient in your time of mourning. My shuttle is prepared. I can depart as soon as your next sunrise and come to offer both my sympathies and my congratulations in the flesh. I will alert my thaumaturge to expect my arrival. She can ensure that accommodations are adequately prepared. I ask that you do not concern yourself with my comfort. I am sure you will have many other concerns during this tragic time. My sympathies are with you and the Commonwealth." She finished her message with a tilt of her head, and the screen blackened. Jaw hanging, Kai faced Torin. He squeezed his fist against his side before they could start to shake. "She wants to come here? Now? It hasn't even been 15 minutes! Torin cleared his throat. "We should discuss this in the morning. Before the press conference, I suppose." Kai turned away, thunking his head against the window. Beyond the glass, the peaks of his father's body were obscured beneath the white sheet, not unlike the Queen and her veil. The Emperor had lost so much weight in the past weeks that his form seemed more like a mannequin's than a man's. His father was no longer there, unable to protect Kai, unable to offer advice, unable to lead his country ever again. "She thinks I'm weak," Kai said. "She's going to try and persuade me to accept the marriage alliance now. Well, everything is in chaos." He kicked the wall, biting back a cry of pain when he remembered he wasn't wearing shoes. "Can't we tell her no? Tell her she's not welcome here?" "I'm not sure that would be the indication of peace your father had been striving for." "She's the one who's been threatening war for the past 12 years!" Torin pursed his lips, and the haunting worry in his gaze quelled Kai's anger. "Discussions must go two ways, Your Highness. We will listen to her requests, but she must listen to ours as well." Kai's shoulders dropped. He turned around, craning his head back and staring at the shadowed ceiling. What did she mean? Her thaumaturge will prepare her accommodations. Removing the mirrors, I suspect. Kai squeezed his eyes shut. Mirrors, right, I forgot. He massaged his forehead. What was it about the Lunars, and not just any Lunar, Queen Lavanna, on Earth, in his country, his home? He shivered. The people aren't going to like this. No, Torin sighed. Tomorrow will be a dark day for the Commonwealth. Chapter 17. A ping darted through Cinder's head, followed by a message scrolled across the blackness of sleep. Com received from New Beijing District 29, Letumosis Quarantine. Lin Peony entered third stage of Letumosis at 0457 on 22 August 126 TE. That's 22 August. It took a minute to shake off the grogginess of sleep and make sense of the scrawling words. She opened her eyes to the windowless bedroom and sat up. All her muscles ached from the midnight trip to the junkyard. Her back hurt so bad it felt as though that old car had run her over, rather than sat in neutral while she and Aiko pushed and pulled it through the back roads. But they had succeeded. The car was hers. Moved to a dark corner of the apartment's underground parking garage where she'd be able to work on it in every spare moment. As long as no one complained about the smell, it would remain her and Aiko's little secret. When they'd finally returned home, Cinder had crashed like someone had hit her power button. For once, she'd had no nightmares. At least, no nightmares until the message woke her. The thought of Peony all alone in the quarantine spurred her out of her pile of blankets with a stifled groan. She pulled on a pair of gloves, stole a green brocade blanket from the linen closet in the hall, and passed Aiko, set to conservation mode, and connected to a charging station in the living room. It felt strange leaving without the android, but she planned on going straight to the palace afterward. In the apartment corridor, she could hear someone pacing on the next floor and a net screen mumbling the morning news. Cinder calmed a hover for the first time in her life, and it was ready for her by the time she got down to the street. She scanned her ID and gave it the quarantine's coordinates before settling into the far back. Cinder net-linked so she could trace the hover's path to the quarantine. The map that overlaid her vision indicated it was in the industrial district, 15 miles outside the city limits. The city was all shadows, blurry, sleepy apartments, and empty sidewalks. The buildings grew shorter with more space between them as the heart of the city was left behind. Pale sunlight crawled down the streets, sending long shadows across the pavement. Cinder knew they'd reach the industrial district without the map's help. She blinked it away and watched the factories roll alongside squat concrete warehouses with gigantic roll-up doors that could accommodate even the largest hover. Probably even cargo ships. Cinder scanned her ID as she exited so the hover could debit her nearly depleted bank account, then ordered it to wait for her. She headed toward the nearest warehouse where a group of androids stood by the door. Above the door was a brand new net screen, flashing, Letumosis, quarantine, patients, and androids only beyond this point. She draped the blanket over her forearms and tried to look confident as she walked, wondering what she would say if the androids questioned her. But the medroids must not have been programmed to deal with healthy people coming into the quarantines. They hardly even noticed her as she passed. She hoped it would be as easy to leave. Perhaps she should have asked Dr. Erland for a pass. The stench of excrement and rot reached out to her as she stepped into the warehouse. She reeled back, cupping her palm over her nose as her stomach churned, wishing her brain interface could dull odors as easily as it could noise. Sucking in a breath through her glove and holding it, she forced herself into the warehouse. It was cooler inside, the concrete floor untouched by the sun. Opaque green plastic covered a thin row of windows near the high ceilings, swathing the building in a dingy haze. Gray light bulbs hummed overhead, but they did little to dispel the darkness. Hundreds of beds were lined up between the distant walls, covered in mismatched blankets, donations, and scraps. She was glad to have brought a nice one for Peony. Most of the beds sat empty. This quarantine had been hastily constructed in just the past weeks as the sickness crept closer to the city. Still, the flies had already caught on and filled the room with buzzing. The few patients Cinder passed were sleeping or staring blankly up at the ceiling, their skin covered in a blue-black rash. Those who still had their senses were hunkered over port screens, their last connection to the outside world. Glossy eyes looked up, following Cinder as she hurried by. More medroids moved between the beds, supplying food and water, but none of them stopped Cinder. She found Peony asleep, tangled in a baby blue blanket. Cinder wasn't sure she would have recognized her if it hadn't been for the chestnut curls draped over her pillow. The purplish splotches had spread up her arms. Though she was shivering, her forehead glistened with sweat. She looked like an old woman, just this side of death. Cinder removed her glove and placed the back of her hand against Peony's forehead, warm to the touch and damp, the third stage of letumosis. She spread the green blanket over Peony, then stood, wondering if she should wake her, or if it was better to let her rest. Rocking back on her heels, she looked around. The bed behind her was empty. The one on the opposite side of Peony was occupied by a petite form turned away from her, curled in a fetal position. A child. Cinder started as she felt a tug on her left wrist. Peony was gripping her steel fingers, squeezing with the little strength she had left. Her eyes watched Cinder, pleading, afraid, awed, as if Peony were seeing a ghost. Cinder swallowed hard and sat down on the bed. It was almost as hard as the floor in her own bedroom. "Take me home," Peony said, her voice scratching at the words. Cinder flinched. She'd covered Peony's hand. "I brought you a blanket," she said, as if it explained her presence. Peony's gaze fell from her. Her free hand traced the texture of the brocade. They said nothing for a long time, until a shrill scream reached them. Peony's hands clenched as Cinder spun around, searching, sure someone was being murdered. A woman 4 aisles away was thrashing in her bed, screeching, begging to be left alone as a calm med-droid waited to inject her with a syringe. A minute later, 2 more androids arrived to hold the woman still, forcing her down on the bed, holding her arm out to receive the shot. Feeling Peony curl up beside her, Cinder turned back. Peony was shaking. "I'm being punished for something," Peony said, shutting her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," Cinder said. "The plague, it isn't fair, I know, but you didn't do anything wrong." She patted the girl's hand. "Are Mom and Pearl?" "Heartbroken," said Cinder. "We all miss you so much, but they haven't caught it." Peony's eyes flickered open. She scanned Cinder's face, her neck. "Where are your spots?" Lips parting, Cinder rubbed absently at her throat, but Peony didn't wait for an answer. "You can sleep there, right?" she said, gesturing to the empty bed. "They won't give you a bed far away?" Cinder squeezed Peony's hands. "No, Peony, I'm not." She looked around, but no one was paying them any attention. A med-droid 2 beds away was helping a patient take a drink of water. "I'm not sick." Peony lifted her head. "You're here." "I know, it's complicated. You see, I went to the Lettumosis Research Center today, and they tested me, and... Peony, I'm immune. I can't get Lettumosis." Peony's tense brow melted. She scanned Cinder's face, neck, arms again, as if her immunity were something visible, something that should have been apparent. "Immune?" Cinder rubbed Peony's hand more quickly, anxious now that she'd told someone her secret. "They asked me to go back again today. The head doctor thinks he might be able to use me as an antidote. I told him that if he finds anything at all, you have to be the first person to get it. I made him promise." She watched, amazed, as Peony's eyes began to fill with tears. "Really?" "Absolutely. We're going to find one." "How long will it take?" I'm not sure." Peony's other hand found her wrist and squeezed. Her long nails dug into Cinder's skin, but it took her a long time to register the pain. Peony's breath had grown rapid. More tears pooled in her eyes, but some with the instant hope had faded, leaving her wild with desperation. "Don't let me die, Cinder. I wanted to go to the ball, remember? You were going to introduce me to Prince..." She turned her head, scrunching her face up in a vain attempt to hold in tears, or hide them, or squeeze them out faster. Then a harsh cough burst from her mouth, along with a thin trail of blood. Cinder grimaced, then reached forward and swiped the blood off Peony's chin with the corner of the brocade blanket. Don't give up, Peony. If I'm immune, then has to be a way to defeat it, and they're going to find it. You're still going to be going to the ball." She considered telling Peony that Aiko had managed to save her dress, but realized that would require telling her that everything else she'd had ever touched was gone. She cleared her throat and stroked Peony's hair off her temple. "Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" Peony shook her head against the warm pillow, holding the blanket against her mouth. But then she raised her eyes. "My port screen?" Cinder flinched with guilt. "I'm sorry, it's still broken, but I'll look at it tonight." "I just want to calm Pearl and Mom." "Of course, I'll bring it to you as soon as I can." Peony's port screen, the prince's android, the car. I'm so sorry, Peony, but I need to go. The small hands tightened. I'll be back as soon as I can. I promise. Peony took in a shaky breath, sniffed, then released her. She dug her frail hands beneath the blanket, burying herself up to her chin. Cinder stood and untangled Peony's hair with her fingers. Try to get some sleep. Reserve your strength. Peony followed Cinder with her watery gaze. I love you, Cinder. I'm glad you're not sick. Cinder's heart tightened. Pursing her lips, she bent over and placed a kiss against Peony's damp forehead. I love you too. She struggled to breathe as she forced herself to walk away, trying to trick herself into being hopeful. There was a chance. A chance. She didn't look at any of the other patients as she made her way to the quarantine's exit, but then she heard her name. She paused, thinking that the sandpaper voice was nothing more than her imagination mixed with too many hysterical cries. Cinder. She turned. Yeah. A little water. She turned and spotted a familiar face, half covered by an age-bleached quilt. Changji? She neared the foot of the bed, nose wrinkling at the pungent odor wafting from the woman's bed. Chung Sacha, the market baker, was barely recognizable with her swollen eyelids and sallow skin. Trying to breathe normally, Cinder rounded the bed. The quilt that rested across Sacha's nose and mouth shifted with her belabored breathing. Her eyes were glossy, as wide as Cinder had ever seen them. It was the only time she could remember Sacha looking at her without disdain. You too, Cinder? Instead of answering, Cinder said uncertainly, Can I do anything for you? They were the kindest words that had ever been passed between them. The blanket shifted, inching down Sacha's face. Cinder bit back a gasp at seeing the blue ringed splotches on the woman's jaw and down her throat. My son, she said, wheezing each word. Bring Zuto. I need to see him. Cinder didn't move, remembering how Sacha had ordered Sunto away from her booth days before. Bring him? Sacha snaked one arm out from beneath the blankets and reached towards Cinder, grasping her wrist where skin met metal. Cinder squirmed, trying to pull away, but Sacha held tight. Her hands was marked by bluish pigment around her yellowed fingernails. The fourth and final stage of the blue fever. I will... Okay. I will try, she said. She reached up, hesitated, then pet Sacha on the knuckles. The blue fingers released her and sank onto the bed. Sunto, Sacha murmured. Her gaze was still locked on Cinder's face, but the recognition had faded. Sunto. Cinder stepped back, watching as the words dried up. The life dulled in Sacha's black eyes. Oh shit. Holy shit. Whew. Cinder convulsed, tying her arms around her stomach. She looked around. None of the other patients were paying any attention to her or the woman, the corpse beside her. But then she saw the android rolling toward them. The med droids must be linked somehow, she thought, to know when someone dies. How long did it take for the notification column to be sent to the family? How long would it be before Sunto knew he was motherless? She wanted to turn away, to leave, but she felt rooted to the spot as the android wheeled up beside the bed and took Sacha's limp hand between its grippers. Sacha's complexion was ashen, but for the bruised blotches on her jaw, her eyes were still open, turned toward the heavens. Perhaps the med-droid would have questions for Cinder. Perhaps someone would want to know the woman's final words. Her son might want to know. Cinder should tell someone. But the med-droid's sensor did not turn toward her. Cinder licked her lips, opened her mouth, but could think of nothing to say. A panel opened in the body of the med-droid. It reached in with its free prongs and pulled out a scalpel. Cinder watched, mesmerized and disgusted, as the android pressed the blade into Sacha's wrist. A stream of blood dripped down Sacha's palm. Cinder shook herself from her stupor and stumbled forward, the foot of the bed pressed into her thighs. "What are you doing?" she said, louder than she'd meant to. The Medroid paused with the scalpel buried in Sacha's flesh. Its yellow visor flashed toward Cinder, then dimmed. "How can I help you?" it said, with its manufactured politeness. "What are you doing to her?" she asked again. She wanted to reach out and snatch the scalpel away, but feared she misunderstood. There must be a reason, something logical. Medroids were all logic. "Removing her ID chip," said the android. "Why?" The visor flashed again, and the android returned to its focus to Sacha's wrist. "She has no more use for it." The Medroid traded the scalper for tweezers, and Cinder heard the subtle click of metal on metal. She grimaced as the android extracted the small chip. Its protective plastic coating glistened scarlet. "But don't you need it to identify the body?" The android dropped the chip into a tray that opened up in its plastic plating. Cinder saw it fall into a bed of dozens of other bloody chips. It drew the tattered blanket over Sacha's unblinking eyes. Instead of answering her question, it said simply, "I have been programmed to follow instructions." Fuck, dude. That's some heavy stuff, man. That's heavy shit, dude. Excuse me. A Medroid rolled into Cinder's path as she exited the warehouse. Oh, sorry. Chapter 18. A Medroid rolled into Cinder's path as she exited the warehouse, blocking her way with outstretched, spindly arms. "Patients are strictly forbidden from leaving the quarantine area," it said, nudging Cinder back into the shadows of the doorway. Cinder swallowed with her panic and halted the robot with the palm against its smooth forehead. "I'm not a patient," she said. "I'm not even sick. Here." She held out her elbow, displaying a small bruise from being stuck with too many needles the past 2 days. The android's innards hummed as it processed her statement, searching its database for a logical reaction. Then a panel opened in its torso, and the third arm, the syringe arm, extended towards Cinder. She flinched, her skin tender, but tried to relax as the android drew a fresh sample of blood. The syringe disappeared into the android's body, and Cinder waited, rolling her sleeve down over the hem of her glove. The test seemed to take longer than at the junkyard, and a sinking panic was crawling up Cinder's spine. What if Dr. Erland had been wrong? When she heard a low beep, and the android backed away, clearing her path. She released her breath and did not look back at the robot or any of its companions as she crossed the hot asphalt. The hover was still waiting for her. Settling into the back seat, she told it to take her to New Beijing Palace. Having been unconscious the first time she'd been brought to the palace, Cinder found herself plastered to the hover's window as she was taken up the steep, winding road to the top of the harsh cliffs that bordered the city. Her netlink fished for information, telling her that the palace had been built after World War IV, when the city was little more than rubble. It was designed in the fashion of the old world, with hearty dosages of both nostalgic symbolism and state-of-the-art engineering. The pagoda-style roofs were made of gold-tinged tiles and surrounded by Qilin. It's Qilin, and I don't know how to pronounce that. Gargoyles. But the tiles were actually galvanized steel, covered with tiny solar capsules that created enough energy to sustain the entire palace, including the research wing, and the gargoyles were equipped with motion sensors, ID scanners, 360-degree cameras, and radars that could detect approaching aircrafts and hovers within a 60-mile radius. All that was invisible, though, the technology hidden in the ornately carved beams and tiered pavilions. What captured Cinder's eye was not the modern technology, but a cobblestone road lined with cherry blossom trees. Bamboo screens framing the garden entrances, through a peep window, a steadily trickling stream. The hover did not stop at the main entrance with its crimson pergolas. Instead, it rounded to the northern side of the palace, nearest the research wing, though this part of the palace was more modern, less nostalgic. Cinder still noticed a squat Buddha sculpture with a cheery face off the pathway. As she paid for the hover and walked toward the automatic glass door, a subtle pulse tugged at her knee. Buddha scanning visitors for weapons. To her relief, the steel in her leg did not set off any alarms. Inside, she was greeted by an android who asked for her name and told her to wait in the elevator bank. The research center was a hive of activity, diplomats and doctors, ambassadors and androids, all roaming the halls on their separate missions. As an elevator opened and Cinder stepped into it, glad to be alone. The doors began to close, but then paused and opened again. Please hold, said the mechanical voice of the elevator operator. A moment later, Prince Kai darted through the half-open doors. Sorry, thanks for the hold. He saw her and froze. Lin Mei? Cinder pushed herself off the elevator wall and fell into the most natural bound she could, simultaneously checking that her left glove was pulled over her left wrist. Or her left glove was pulled over her wrist. Your Highness! The voice wore a rush, spit out automatically, and she felt the need to say something more to fill the space of the elevator, but nothing came. The doors closed. The box began to rise. She cleared her throat. You should just call me Cinder. You don't have to be so diplomatic. The corner of the prince's lips quirked, but the almost smile didn't reach his eyes. All right, Cinder, are you following me? She frowned, hackles rising before she realized he was teasing her. I'm just going to check on the med droid that I looked at yesterday to ensure it doesn't have any remaining bugs or anything. He nodded, but Cinder detected a shadow lingering behind his eyes, a new stiffness to his shoulders. I was on my way to talk to Dr. Oh. This is Prince Kai talking. I was on my way to talk to Dr. Erland about his progress. I heard through the grapevine that he may have made progress with one of the recent draft subjects. I don't suppose he said anything to you? Cinder fidgeted with her belt loops. No, he didn't mention anything, but I'm just the mechanic. The elevator came to a stop. Kai gestured for her to exit first, and then joined her as they made their way to the laboratories. She watched the white floor pass beneath her feet. Your Highness? Interrupted a youngish woman with black hair that hung in a tight braid. Her gaze was fixed on Prince Kai, all sympathy. I'm so sorry. Cinder's gaze shifted to Kai, who tipped his head at the woman. Thank you, Fatine. And kept walking. Cinder frowned. Not a dozen steps later, they were halted again by a man carrying a handful of clear vials in his fists. My condolences, Your Highness. Cinder shivered as her feet came to a pause behind her. Kai stopped and peered back at her. You haven't seen the net this morning. A heartbeat later, Cinder was accessing her netlink, pages flashing across her eyes. The EC news page, a half-dozen pictures of Emperor Riken, 2 pictures of Kai, the Prince Regent. She clapped a hand to her mouth. Kai seemed surprised, but the look quickly faded. He ducked his head, his black bangs falling into his eyes. Good guess. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He tucked his hands into his pockets and gazed down the hallway. Only now did Cinder notice the faint rim of red around his eyes. I wish my father's death were the worst of it. Your Highness? Her netlink was still scanning for information, but nothing seemed worse than Emperor Riken having passed away last night. The only other noteworthy tidbit was that Prince Kai's coronation had been scheduled for the same evening of the Peace Festival, to take place before the ball. He met her gaze, surprised, as if he'd forgotten who he was speaking with. Then, you can call me Kai. She blinked. Excuse me? No more, Your Highness. I get enough of that from everyone else. You should just call me Kai. No, that wouldn't be... Don't make me turn it into a royal command. He hinted at a smile. Cinder scrunched her shoulders up by her ears, suddenly embarrassed. All right, I suppose. Thank you. He cocked his head toward the hall. We should go then. She had nearly forgotten that they were in the research hall, surrounded by people, everyone politely ignoring them as if they were not even there. She started down the hallway, wondering if she'd spoken out of place and awkward beside the prince, who was suddenly just Kai. It didn't feel right. What was wrong with the android? She scratched at an oil stain on her glove. Oh, I'm sorry. She's not done yet. I'm working on her, I swear. No, I meant the Medroid that you had fixed for Dr. Erland. Oh, right. It had, dead wire between its optisensor and control panel. Kai lifted an eyebrow, and she wasn't sure that she'd convinced him. She cleared her throat. You, said something was worse before? When Kai said nothing for an awkward moment, she shrugged. Never mind. I didn't mean to pry. No, it's all right. You'll find out soon enough. He lowered his voice, inclining his head toward her as they walked. Helps when the pages don't stick together. Hey, come on, buddy. Come on. 160 comes after 159, not 162. Don't be a dick. Come on. There we go. The Lunar Queen informed us this morning that she is coming to the Commonwealth on a diplomatic mission, supposedly. Cinder nearly tripped, but Kai kept walking. She stumbled after him. The Lunar Queen is coming here? You can't be serious. I wish I weren't. Every android in the palace has spent the morning taking down every reflective surface in the guest wing. It's ridiculous, like we've nothing better to do. Reflective surfaces? I always thought that was superstition. Evidently not. Something about their glamour. He twirled a finger around his face, then stopped. It doesn't really matter. When is she coming? Today. Cinder's stomach plummeted. The Lunar Queen, coming to New Beijing? A chill crawled down her arms. I'll be making an announcement in half an hour. But why would she come now, when we're in mourning? A grim smile. Because we're in mourning. Kai paused. With a glance around the hallway, he inched towards Cinder, lowering his voice. Look, I really appreciate your helping with the med droids, and I'm sure the best mechanic in the city has a million jobs to prioritize. But at the risk of sounding like a spoiled prince, could I ask that you move Nancy to the top of your list? I'm starting to get anxious about getting her back. He hesitated. I think I could use the moral support of my childhood tutor right now. You know? The intensity in his eyes did not try to hide his true meaning. He wanted her to know he was lying. This had nothing to do with moral support or childhood attachments. The panic behind the prince's eyes spoke volumes. What information could that android have that was so important? And what did it have to do with the Lunar Queen? If it's a way to kill the Lunar Queen or stop her some way, or like find a way not to let her like use her evil like beauty powers, Of course, Your Highness. Sorry, Prince Kai. I'll take a look at her as soon as I get home. She thought she spotted gratitude hidden somewhere beneath all his worry. Kai gestured at the door behind him, labeled Dr. Dmitry Erland. I don't know why I said it in that voice. He opened the door and ushered her in. Dr. Erland was sitting at a lacquered desk, poring over a screen set into the surface. When he spotted Kai, he leapt to his feet, simultaneously snatching his wool cap and rounding the desk towards them. Your Highness, I'm so sorry. What can I do to help you? Nothing, thank you, said Kai, a practiced reaction. Then he pulled his shoulders back, reconsidering. Find a cure. I will, Your Highness. He pulled his hat on. Of course I will. The conviction in the doctor's face was almost startling, but almost comforting. Cinder immediately wondered if he'd found something new in the hours since she'd last seen him. She thought of Peony, alone in the quarantine, though it was an awful thing to think, and she immediately chastised herself for it. She couldn't help it. With Emperor Riken dead, Peony was the first in line for an antidote. Kai cleared his throat. I found your pretty new mechanic down in the lobby, and she tells me that she's here to check on the med droids again. You know I could get you funding for some upgraded models if you require it. Cinder started at that simple word. Pretty. But neither Kai nor Dr. Erland looked at her. Teetering on her feet, she scanned the room. A floor-to-ceiling window captured a perfect view of the lush palace gardens and the city beyond. Open shelves were filled with objects both familiar and unusual, new and ancient. A stack of books, not portrait screens, but solid paper books. Jars filled with leaves and dried flowers, jars filled with finely labeled liquids, jars filled with animal specimens and formaldehyde. A series of rocks and metals and ores, all finely labeled. It was the office of a witch doctor as much as an acclaimed royal scientist. No, they only need a touch of maintenance, Dr. Erland was saying, lying as smoothly as he had the day before. Nothing to worry about, and I would hate to have to program a new model. Besides, if we didn't have any malfunctioning androids, what excuse would we have for asking Miss Lin back to the palace from time to time? Cinder glared at the doctor, half mortified, but the start of a smile grew on Kai's face. Doctor, said Kai, I heard a rumor that you've made some sort of a breakthrough in the past few days. Is it true? Dr. Erland pulled the spectacles from his pocket and set to cleaning them with the hem of his lab coat. My prince, you should know better than to ask after rumors like that. I hate to give you hope before I know anything concrete, but when I have solid information, you will be the first to see the report. He slid the glasses onto his nose. Kai tucked his hands into his pockets, seemingly satisfied. Right. In any case, I'll leave you be and hope to see a report cross my desk any day now. That could be difficult, Your Highness, considering you do not have a desk. Kai shrugged and turned to Cinder. His eyes softened a little with a polite bow of his head. I hope our paths cross again. Really? In that case, I guess I'll keep following you. She regretted the joke for half a breath before Kai laughed, a real laugh, and her chest warmed. Then the prince reached for her hand, her cyborg hand. Cinder tensed, terrified that he would feel the hard metal, even through her gloves, and yet even more afraid to pull away lest he find it suspicious. She mentally urged the robotic limb to go soft, to be pliant, to be human, as she watched Kai lift the hand and kiss the back of it. She held her breath, overwhelmed and embarrassed. The prince released her, bowed, his hair falling to over his eyes again, and left the room. Cinder stood frozen, her wired nerves humming. She heard Dr. Erland grunting curiosity, but the door opened again as soon as it had closed. Gracious! Dr. Erland muttered as Kai stepped back inside. Pardon me, but might I have one more brief word with Lin Mei? Oh, no, that's Dr. Kai reading that. Gracious, Dr. Erland. No, okay, so I got that right. Gracious, Dr. Erland muttered as Kai stepped back inside. Pardon me, but might I have one more brief word with Lin Mei? Dr. Erland flicked his wrist towards her. By all means. Kai turned to her, still in the doorway. I know this sounds like very poor timing, but trust me when I say my motives are based on self-preservation. He inhaled a sharp breath. Would you consider being my personal guest at the ball? Oh, yo, he's inviting Cinder out to the ball. Let's go! The floor dissolved beneath Cinder. Her mind blanked. Surely she hadn't heard correctly. But he just stood, patient, and after a long moment raised both his eyebrows in a mute prompt. Excuse me? Kai cleared his throat, stood straighter. I assume you are going to the ball? I don't know. I mean, no, sorry. I'm not going to the ball. Kai drew back, confused. Oh, well, but maybe you would change your mind, because I am, you know. The prince. Not bragging, he said quickly. Just a fact. I know. She gulped. The ball. Prince Kai was asking her to the ball, but that was the night she and Aiko would be running away if her car was fixed in time, the night she would escape, because she didn't know what he was asking. If he knew the truth, how mortified would he be if anyone finds out? Kai shifted on his feet, casting a nervous glance toward the doctor. I'm sorry, she stammered. Thank you, Your Highness, but I must respectfully decline. He blinked. His eyes fell as he processed her response. Then he lifted his chin and attempted a grin that was almost painfully dejected. No, it's all right. I understand. Dr. Erland leaned back against his desk. My sincerest condolences, Your Highness, in more ways than one, it seems. Cinder cast him a frosty glare, but he focused his attention on cleaning his spectacles again. Kai scratched behind his neck. It was nice to see you again, Lin Mei. She flinched at the return of the formality and made to speak, her voice catching at apologies, explanations, but the prince didn't wait for him. The door was already shutting behind him. She snapped her jaw shut, thoughts sparking in her head. Dr. Erland clicked his tongue, and Cinder prepared to rail at him with those budding explanations, but he turned away before she could and paced back to his seat. What a shame you cannot blush, Miss Lin. Yo, she rejected Prince Kai to the ball. What the fuck is up with that? Yo, what? The fuck? No. Dog, that ain't right. I ain't down with that. See, the problem is, I always took a little break after that before we started the next chapter. Chapter 19, by the way. And I ate some pork rinds, right? Because, pork rinds are awesome. Don't eat pork rinds if you're reading a book. It dries your throat out. Oh, there's not enough water left on this planet to hydrate me. Oh, but those pork rinds were so good. I don't know why I thought I'd make that noise. Anyway. Chapter 19. Dr. Erland held both hands toward a chair on the other side of his desk. Please sit down. I only need to finish up a few notes, and then I will tell you some of the things I've learned since yesterday afternoon. Cinder sat down, glad to get off her weak legs. The prince just... Yes, I was standing right here. Dr. Erland reclaimed his own seat and tapped at the screen in his desk. Cinder leaned back against the chair, gripping its arms to quell her shaking. Her mind was replaying the conversation while her retina scanner informed her that her body was producing mass amounts of endorphins and she should try to calm down. Cool it, bitch. You're getting horny. Cool it, chickie. What's wrong with me? What do you think he meant by his motives being based on self-preservation? He probably doesn't want to be mauled by all the young ladies at the ball this year. There was nearly a stampede a couple years back. She bit her lip. Of all the girls in the whole city, she was the most convenient. Come on, Cinder, that's not why he asked, and you know it. She forced these words to resonate, to stick. She was here, and she seemed to be sane, and she was a safe bet for him to ask to the ball. That was all it could be. Come on, Cinder. Besides, he was in mourning. He wasn't thinking straight. Emperor Riken is dead, she said, snatching for anything else to think about. Indeed. Prince Kai was close to his father, She lowered her gaze to the screen Dr. Erland was hunched over. She could see only a small diagram of a human torso, surrounded by boxes of dense text. It did not appear to be hers. I would be lying, Dr. Erland continued, if I said that I had not harbored secret hopes of finding an antidote in time to save His Majesty, though I knew from the moment the diagnosis was made that it was unlikely. Nevertheless, we must proceed with our work. She nodded in agreement, thinking of Peony's little hand gripping hers. Doctor, why haven't you told the prince about me? Don't you want him to know that you found someone who's immune? Isn't that important? He pressed his lips, but didn't look up at her. Perhaps I should, but it would be his responsibility to share the news with the country, and I don't think we're ready to draw attention to this. When we have solid evidence that you are, as valuable as I hope, then we will share our news with the prince and the world. She picked up a port-screen stylus that was lying abandoned on the desk and examined it like a scientific mystery, twirling it like a pinwheel over her fingers. She murmured, You also didn't tell him I'm a cyborg. The doctor made eye contact now, his crow's feet crinkling. Ah, and that's what you're most concerned about? She could confirm or deny. Dr. Erland waved his hand as if to dismiss her defensiveness. Do you think I should tell him you're a cyborg? I will if you want me to, but I frankly didn't see it was any of his business. Cinder dropped the stylus into her lap. No, that isn't... Dr. Erland snorted. He was laughing at her. Cinder huffed in irritation and glared out the window. The city was almost blindingly bright in the morning sun. Not like it matters. He'll find out eventually. Yes, I suppose he will. Especially if he continues to show, interest in you. Dr. Erland pushed his chair back from the desk. There. Your DNA sequencing has been completed. Shall we make our way to the lab room? She followed him into the sterile hallway. It was a short walk to the labs, and they entered lab room 11D this time, which looked exactly like lab room 4D. Net screen, built-in cabinets, a single exam table, no mirror. Hey, yo, hold up. It says no mirror, but they were taking down the reflective surfaces for the lunar stuff, so I don't know if there's a... I don't know if that's a connection to draw there. Cinder sat down on the exam table without being told. I went to the quarantines today to visit my sister. The doctor paused, his hand on the net screen's power button. That was something of a risk. You understand that people aren't supposed to leave once they arrive, you know? I know, but I had to see her. She swung her legs, beating her feet against the table's legs. One of the mad droids ran a blood test on me before I left, and I was clear. The doctor fiddled with the net screen's controls. Indeed. I just thought you should know, in case that might affect something. It doesn't. He stuck his tongue out of the corner of his mouth. A second later, the screen blazed to life. His hand skimmed across the screen, pulling up Cinder's file. It was more complex today, filled with information even she didn't know about herself. And I saw something, she said. The doctor grunted, more focused on the screen than ever. One of the Medroids took an ID chip from a victim after she died. The Medroid said it was programmed to take it. It had dozens of them. Dr. Erland turned back to her with a mildly interested expression. He seemed to ponder this a moment. Then his face slowly relaxed. Well, what? Why did you do it? Why did it do that? The doctor scratched his cheek, where a fine beard had started to grow across his leathery face. It's a common practice in rural parts of the world, where letumosis has been claiming lives for much longer than it has in cities. The chips are extracted from the deceased and sold off. Illegally, of course, but I understand they can fetch a high price. Why would anyone want to buy someone else's ID chip? Because it is difficult making a living without one. Money, accounts, benefits, licenses, they all require an identity. He stitched his eyebrows. Although, that brings up an interesting point. With all the letumosis fatalities of the past few years, one would think the market is saturated with unneeded ID chips. It's curious that they would still be in demand. I know, but you already have one. She paused as his words sank in. Would it really be that easy to steal a person's identity? Unless you want to become someone else, he said, reading her thoughts. Thieves, fugitives of the law. The doctor rubbed his head through the hat. The rare lunar, they, of course, do not have ID chips to begin with. There aren't any lunars on Earth. Well, other than ambassadors, I guess. Dr. Erland's gaze filled with pity, as if she were a naive child. Oh, yes, to Queen Levana's endless dismay, not all lunars are so easily brainwashed into mindless contentment, and many have risked their lives to escape Luna and relocate here. It's difficult to leave the moon, and I'm sure many more die attempting it than succeed, especially as more restrictions are put on lunar ports, but I'm sure it still happens. But that's illegal. They're not supposed to be here at all. Why haven't we stopped them? Well, political issues. Nice. For a moment, it looked as if... I'm sorry, I'm reading. Can I help you, my friends? You can wait. I'm reading. For a moment, it looked as if Dr. Erland might laugh. Escaping from Luna is difficult. Getting to Earth is the easy part. Lunars have a way of cloaking their spacecrafts and making their way into Earth's atmosphere without detection. Magic. Cinder fidgeted. You make it sound like they're escaping from a prison. Dr. Erland raised both his eyebrows at her. Yes, that seems exactly right. Cinder kicked her boots into the lab table. The thought of Queen Levana coming to New Beijing had twisted her stomach. The thought of dozens, maybe even hundreds of Lunars living on Earth and impersonating Earthens nearly had her running for the sink. Those savages with the programmed ID chip and their ability to brainwash people, they could be anyone, become anyone. Cinder's racist. That's funny. That is funny. What actual interplanetary racism? The main character is an interplanetary racist. Oh, shit. And Earthens would never know they were being manipulated. Don't look so frightened, Miss Lynn. They mostly stick to the countrysides, where their presence is more likely to go unnoticed. The chances of you having ever crossed paths with one is extremely unlikely. He smiled, a teasing, closed-lip smile. Cinder sat up straighter. You sure seem to know a lot about them. I'm an old man, Miss Lynn. I know a lot about a lot of things. All right, here's a question. What's with lunars and mirrors? I always thought it was just a myth that they're afraid of them, but is it true? The doctor's eyebrows knit together. It has some element of truth. You understand how lunars make use of their glamours. Not really. I see, he said, rocking back in his heels. Well, the lunar gift is nothing more than the ability to manipulate bioelectric energy, the energy that is naturally created by all living things. For example, it is the same energy that sharks use to detect their prey. Sounds like something lunars would do. The lines around the doctor's mouth crinkled. Lunars have the unique ability to not only detect bioelectricity in others, but also to control it. They can manipulate it so that people see what the lunar wishes them to see, and even feel what the lunar wishes them to feel. A glamour is what they call the illusion of themselves, that they project into the minds of others. Like making people think you're more beautiful than you really are? Precisely. Or, he gestured at Cinder's hands, making a person see skin where there was really metal. Cinder self-consciously rubbed her cyborg hand through the glove. It is why Queen Lavanna is so striking to look at. Some talented lunars, such as the Queen, keep their glamour up all the time. But just as she cannot trick the next screens, neither can she trick a mirror. So they don't like mirrors because they don't want to see themselves? Vanity is a factor, but it's more of a question of control. It is easier to trick others into perceiving you as beautiful if you can convince yourself you are beautiful. Let me try that again. It is easier to trick others into perceiving you as beautiful if you can convince yourself you are beautiful. But mirrors have an uncanny way of telling the truth. Dr. Erlin peered at her, as if amused. And now a question for you, Miss Lynn. Why the sudden interest in lunars? Cinder lowered her gaze to her hands and realized she was still carrying the stylus stolen off his desk. Something Kai said. His Highness? She nodded. He told me Queen Lavanna is coming to New Beijing. The doctor drew back. He gaped at her, bushy eyebrows nearly touching the brim of his hat, then stepped back against the cabinets. For the first time that day, his focus was entirely on her. When? She's supposed to arrive today. Today? She jumped. She could not have imagined Dr. Erland raising his voice before. He spun away from her, scratching his hat, pondering. Are you all right? He waved away the question. I suppose she would have been waiting for this. He pulled off his hat, revealing a bald spot surrounded by thin, messy hair. He shuffled his hand through it a few times, glaring at the floor. She is hoping to prey on Kai, his youth, his inexperience. Ugh. He blew out a furious breath and replaced the hat. Cinder splayed her fingers out on her knees. What do you mean, prey on him? He turned back to her. His face was pulled taut, his eyes turbulent. The stare he pinned on Cinder made her shrink away. You should not be worried about the prince, Miss Lynn. I shouldn't? She is coming today. That is what he told you? She nodded. Then you must leave, quickly. You can't be here when she arrives. He shooed her off the table. Cinder hopped down but made no move toward the door. What does this have to do with me? We have your blood samples, your DNA. We can do without you for now. Just stay away from the palace until she's gone. Do you understand? Cinder planted her feet. No, I don't. The doctor looked from her to the net screen still showing her stats. He appeared confused, old, frazzled. Screen, display current news feed. Cinder's stats vanished, replaced by a news anchor. The headline above him announced the Emperor's death. Highness is prepared to make a speech in just a few minutes on the death of His Imperial Majesty and the upcoming coronation. We will be broadcasting live. Mute. Cinder folded her arms. Doctor? He turned pleading eyes to Cinder. Miss Lin, you must listen very carefully. I'll turn my audio interface volume to max. She leaned back against the cabinets, disappointed when Dr. Erlin didn't so much as blink at her sarcasm. He blew out a disgruntled sigh. I'm not sure how to say this. I thought I would have more time. He rubbed his hands together. Oh my god, he's gonna reveal something! He rubbed his hands together, paced back towards the door, squared his shoulder and faced Cinder again. You were 11 when you had your operation, correct? The question was not what she'd expecting. Yes? And before that you don't remember anything? Nothing. What does that have to do with... But your adoptive parents, surely they must have told you something about your childhood, your background? Her right palm began to sweat. My stepfather died not long after the accident, and Audrey doesn't like to talk about it, if she even knows anything. Adopting me wasn't exactly her idea. Do you know anything about your biological parents? Cinder shook her head. Just their names, birth dates, whatever was in my files. The files on your ID chip. Well, irritation burst inside her. What's your point? Dr. Erlin's eyes softened, trying to comfort, but the look only unnerved her. Miss Lin, from your blood samples, I have deduced that you are in fact lunar. The word washed over Cinder as if he were speaking a different language. The machine in her brain kept ticking, like it was working through an impossible equation. Lunar? The word evaporated off her tongue, almost non-existent. Yes. Lunar? Indeed. She pulled back, looked at the walls, the exam table, the silent news anchor. I don't have magic, she said, folding her arms in defiance. Yes, well, not all Lunars are born with the gift. They're called shells, which is a slightly derogatory connotation on Luna, so... Well, bioelectrically challenged doesn't sound much better, does it? He chuckled awkwardly. Cinder's metal hand clenched. She wished briefly that she did have some sort of magic so she could shoot a bolt of lightning through his head. I'm not lunar. She wrenched her glove off and waved her hand at him. I'm cyborg. You don't think that's bad enough? Lunars can be cyborgs as easily as humans. It's rare, of course, given their intense opposition of cybernetics and brain-machine interfaces. Cinder faked a gasp. No, who would be opposed to that? But being lunar and being cyborg are not mutually exclusive, and it isn't altogether surprising that you were brought here. Since the instatement of the non-gifted infanticide under Queen Shannery, many lunar parents have attempted to rescue their shell children by bringing them to Earth. Of course, most of them die and are executed for the attempt, but still, I believe this was the case with you. The rescuing part, not the execution part. An orange light flickered in the corner of her vision. Cinder squinted at the man. You're lying. I am not lying, Miss Lin. She opened her mouth to argue. Which part? What exactly had he said that triggered the lie detector? The light went away as she continued speaking. This also explains your immunity. In fact, when you defeated the pathogens yesterday, your being lunar was the first possibility to cross my mind, but I didn't want to say anything until I'd confirmed it. Cinder pressed her palms against her eyes, blocking out the blaring fluorescence. What does this have to do with immunity? Lunars are immune to the disease, of course. No, not of course. This isn't common knowledge. She strung her hands back against her ponytail. Oh, well, but it is common sense when you know the history. He wrung his hands, which I suppose most people don't. Cinder hid her face, gasping for air. Perhaps she could rely on the man being insane and not have to believe anything he said, after all. You see, said Dr. Erland, Lunars are the original carrier hosts for Litimosis. Their migration to the rural areas of Earth, mostly during the reign of Queen Shannery, brought the disease into contact with the humans for the first time. Historically, it's a common situation. The rats that brought the bubonic plague into Europe, the conquistadors who brought smallpox to the Native Americans. It sounds so second era that Earthens take their immunities for granted now, but with the migration of the Lunars, well, Earthen immune systems just weren't prepared. Once even a handful of Lunars arrived, bringing the disease with them, it began to spread like wildfire. I thought I wasn't contagious. You aren't now, but your body has developed means of ridding itself of the disease, but you may have been at one point. Besides, I suspect that Lunars have different levels of immunity. While some can rid their bodies of the disease entirely, others carry it around without ever developing outward symptoms, spreading it everywhere they go and being none the wiser of the trouble they're causing. Cinder waved her hands before him. No, you're wrong. There must be some other explanation. I can't be... I understand this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand why you cannot be present when Her Majesty arrives. It's far too dangerous. No, you don't understand. I am not one of them. To be cyborg and lunar, one was enough to make her a mutant and outcast, but to be both, she shuddered. Lunars were a cruel, savage people. They murdered their shell children. They lied and scammed and brainwashed each other because they could. They didn't care who they hurt, so long as it benefited themselves. She was not one of them. Miss Lin, you must listen to me. You were brought here for a reason. What, to help you find a cure? You think this is some sort of twisted gift of fate? I am not talking fate or destiny. I am talking survival. You cannot let the Queen see you. Cinder shrank against the cabinet, more baffled by the second. Why? Why would she care about me? She would care very much about you. He hesitated, his sea blue eyes wild with panic. She hates lunar shells, you see. Shells are immune to the lunar glamour. He twirled his hands through the air, searching. They're brainwashing, as it were. Queen Levana can't control shells, which is why she continues to have them exterminated. His lips hardened. Queen Levana will stop at nothing to ensure her control, to terminate any resistance. That means killing those who could resist her. People like you. Do you understand, Miss Lin? If she were to see you, she would kill you. Fuck. Gulping, Cinder pressed her thumb against her left wrist. She couldn't feel her ID chip, but she knew it was there. Extracted from the deceased. If Dr. Erland were right, then everything she knew about herself, her childhood, her parents, was wrong. A made-up history. A made-up girl. The idea that Lunars were fugitives no longer sounded so odd. She turned toward the net screen. Kai was there now, in the press room, talking at the podium. Miss Lin, somebody went through a great deal of trouble to bring you here, and now you are in extreme danger. You cannot jeopardize yourself. She barely heard, watching as text began to scroll across the bottom of the screen. Just announced, Lunar Queen Levana to come to the Eastern Commonwealth for Peace Alliance discussions. Just announced, Lunar Queen Levana. Miss Lin, are you listening to me? Yeah, she said. Extreme danger. I heard you. Okay, alright. Hang on, I gotta put the book down so we can talk about this for a second, and I have to respond to a text. I'm gonna do that as I'm talking. Just finished chapter 19. What the fuck do you mean she's a lunar? I knew I was right, question mark. She's gonna be the daughter that was attempted to be killed by Queen Levana. LOL. Oh my god, what a bomb drop! Exclamation point. Holy fucking shit! Stop being kind and respectful. Comma. Keep being you. Alright. So we know, so I had that theory and I said it in the first one. What if Cinder was the daughter of Queen Levana, or that one child, Princess Celine? What if Cinder is Princess Celine? Because they never found a body, but they found the remains of one. Like, it's so freaking hard. Just throw some extra ash, put out a little cigarette, and suddenly you found some human remains. Oh my god, she's a lunar, and she's so incredibly racist against her own people. What is this Uncle Tom bullshit in here? Oh my god, this book is so fucking good. Oh, this book is so fucking good! Alright. She's Princess Celine. I'm calling that shit right fucking now. She's Princess Celine. I'm calling that shit right fucking now. She's Princess Celine. I am calling that shit now. There we go. All right. Sorry, this person that booked me on the series is like super excited for me. All right. Chapter 20. Actually, 2 seconds. I know this was a recording. I can fix it, but 2 seconds. All right. Yes, it's a recording, but also I'm doing this. Okay, just 2 seconds, because I want a snack. It's a good book, and when you have a good book, you have to get comfy and get a snack. Maybe add Airhead shower bars just the right thing, but I don't care. All right. Chapter 20. It's good candy. Welcome to ASMR. I'm sorry, but I need a snack. The lunar spacecraft did not... No, this isn't going to work. The lunar spacecraft did not appear much different from Earth and spacecrafts, except that its body shimmered as if inlaid with diamonds, and a string of gold runes encircled its hull in an unbroken line. That part with the gold runes makes me think of like rune magic and stuff like that. Kind of like how you infuse a sword with runes to give it mystic properties and shit. I don't know, imagine something like that. Anyway. The ship was too bright in the afternoon sun, and Kai had to squint against the glare. He did not know if the runes were magic, or if they were only meant to seem so. He did not know if the ship was made out of some fancy glittering material, or if they'd just painted it that way. He did know it hurt to look at. It's gaudy. Oh. The ship was larger than the personal shuttle the Queen's... Oh. The ship was larger than the personal shuttle the Queen's head thaumaturge, Sybil, had come to Earth on, and yet still relatively small for all the importance it carried. Smaller than most passenger ships, and smaller than any cargo ship Kai had seen. It was a private ship, meant only for the Lunar Queen and her entourage. The ship landed without a jolt. Heat rose up from the concrete in blistering waves. The fine silk of Kai's shirt was clinging to his back, and a trickle of sweat begun down his neck. In the evening, the welcome pad would be sheltered by the palace's stone walls, but now it was under full assault by the late August sun. They waited. Torin, at Kai's side, did not fidget. His face was impassive, expectant. His calmness only unsettled Kai even more. On Kai's other side, Sybil Mira stood dressed in her official white coat with its embroidered runes, similar to those on the ship. The material seemed lightweight, yet it covered her from the top of her throat to the knuckles of each hand, and the flared tails hung past her knees. She must have been sweltering, but she looked fully composed. A few steps behind her stood the blonde guard, hands clasped behind his back. Two of Kai's own royal guards stood at either side of the platform. That was all. Lavanna had insisted that no one else greet her at the pad. Kai dug his nails into his palms in an attempt to keep the sneer from his face, and waited while the heat plastered his bangs to his forehead. Finally, when the queen seemed to have grown tired of making them suffer, the ramp of the ship descended, revealing silver-furnished stairs. Ain't nothing but a G thing. The two men alighted first, both tall, both muscular. One was pale with wildly unkempt orange hair and was dressed in the same warrior-like body armor and weaponry that Sybil's guard wore. The other man was dark as the night sky, with no hair at all, and wore a coat like Sybil's with its bell sleeveless and embroidery. His, however, was crimson, announcing that he was beneath Sybil, a second-tier thaumaturge. Kai was glad he knew enough about the lunar court to recognize that, at least. He watched the two men as they surveyed the pad, the surrounding walls, and the assembled group with stoic expressions before standing to either side of the ramp. Sybil slinked forward. Kai swallowed a breath of stifling air. Queen Lavanna appeared at the top of the stairs. She still wore her long veil, blindingly bright beneath the relentless sun. Her white dress whispered around her hips as she glided down the steps and accepted Sybil's hand. Sybil dipped to one knee and touched her forehead to her queen's knuckle. Our separation was insufferable. I am pleased to be in your service once more, my queen. Then she stood, and with a graceful motion lifted the veil back from Lavanna's face. The hot air caught in Kai's throat, choking him. The queen paused just long enough to seem as though she were letting her eyes adjust to the bright daylight of Earth, but Kai suspected she really just wanted him to see her. She was indeed beautiful, as if someone had taken the scientific measurements of perfection and used them to mold a single ideal specimen. Her face was slightly heart-shaped, with high cheekbones barely flushed. Auburn hair fell in silken ringlets to her waist, and her unblemished ivory skin shimmered, like mother of pearl in the sunshine. Her lips were red, looking like she'd just drunk a pint of blood. A chill shook Kai from the inside out. She was unnatural. Kai risked a glance at Torin, and saw that he held Lavanna's gaze without outward emotion. Seeing his advisor's resolve sent a jolt of determination through Kai, reminding him that it was only an illusion. He forced himself to look at the queen again. Her onyx eyes glittered as they swept over him. "Your Majesty," Kai said, folding a fist to his heart, "it is my greatest honor to welcome you to my country and planet." Her lips curled. A sweetness lit up her face, an innocence to match a child's. It unsettled him. She did not bow or even nod, but instead held out her hand. Kai hesitated, staring at the pale, translucent skin, wondering if just touching her was all it would take to destroy a man's mind. Bracing himself, he took her hand and brushed a quick kiss against her fingers. Nothing happened. "Your Highness," she said in a lifting voice that thrummed along Kai's spine, "it is my greatest honor to be thus welcomed. Might I again offer my sincerest condolences on the loss of your father, the great Emperor Riken." Kai knew she was not at all sorry for his father's death, but neither her expression nor her tone hinted at a thing. "Thank you," he replied. "I hope everything meets your expectations during your visit." "I look forward to the Eastern Commonwealth's famed hospitality." Sybil stepped forward, eyes respectfully averted from Queen Lavanna. "I inspected your quarters myself, my queen. They are subpar to our accommodations on Luna, but I think they will be adequate." Lavanna did not acknowledge her thaumaturge, but her gaze softened and the world changed. Kai felt that the ground lurched beneath him, that the air had been sucked from the Earth's atmosphere, that the sun had gone black, leaving the ethereal queen the only source of light in the galaxy. Tears pricked at the back of his eyes. He loved her. He needed her. He would do anything to please her. He jabbed his fingernails into his palms as hard as he could, nearly yelping from the pain, but it worked. The queen's control disintegrated, leaving only the beautiful woman, not the desperate adoration of her. He knew that she was aware of the effect she'd had on him, as he struggled to soothe his ragged breath, and though he'd wanted to detect cold haughtiness in her black eyes, he saw nothing at all. "If you will follow me," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "I will show you to your rooms." "That will not be necessary," said Sybil. "I am quite familiar with the guest wing and can take Her Majesty myself. We would like a moment to speak in private." "Of course," said Kai, hoping that his relief didn't show. Sybil led the way, the second thaumaturge and the two guards marching behind. They paid Kai and Torin no heed as they passed, but Kai didn't doubt they would snap his neck in a second if he made any suspicious movements. He released a shaky breath when they had gone. Did you feel her? He said. He asked, barely above a whisper. Oh, so. Did you feel her? This book is wild. Because it's not whisper. It's not whisper. It's like just above something. Did you feel her? Of course, said Torin. His eyes were drawn to the ship, but he could have been staring at Mars for all the focus in his eyes. You resisted her well, Your Highness. I know it was difficult. Kai brushed his hair off his forehead, seeking a breeze, any breeze, but it didn't come. It wasn't so hard. It was only for a moment. Torin's eyes met his. It was one of the few times Kai had seen true sympathy in that gaze. It will get harder. Book 3. You want to go to the festival, all covered in dust and dirt, but we would only be ashamed of you. Okay, so Queen Levana's the witch doctor. She showed up and she told Prince Kai was like, "Hey, what's going on, witch doctor?" And Queen Levana says, "Ooh ee ooh ah ah ting tang walla walla bing bang." I hope that joke was worth it. This book is crazy. Okay, what do we know about Queen Levana? She's a bitch. She does have the evil voodoo powers, the glamour, the thing that Dr. Erlin was talking about. Okay, right. And it's weird because he didn't feel that the instant that he met her. She let Prince Kai see her from. All right, re-upped in some water, re-upped in some snacks. I actually something was going on and it didn't record when I started this chapter, but I only got to like 2 pages in, so it's not that bad. We continue. Chapter 21. Cinder slumped down at her work desk, relieved to finally be out of that stifling apartment. Not only was the air system down again, with maintenance nowhere to be seen, but the awkwardness between her and Audrey bordered on unbearable. They'd been tiptoeing around each other since she had returned home from the lab 2 days before. Audrey trying to remind Cinder of her superiority by ordering her to defrag their apartment's entire mainframe and update all of the software that they didn't even use anymore, while at the same time lurking around as if she were almost, kind of, ashamed of what she'd done to Cinder. But Cinder was probably imagining that last part, as Pearl had gone all day, had been gone all day, and had only shown up when Cinder and Aiko were on their way out to work on the car. Another long day, another late night. The car was going to take more work than she'd realized. The entire exhaust system needed to be replaced, which meant remanufacturing a lot of parts herself, which created any number of headaches. She had a feeling she wasn't going to get much sleep if they were going to have it ready by the night of the ball. She sighed. The ball. She didn't regret saying no when the prince had asked her, because she knew how badly that would end. Any number of things were sure to go wrong, from tripping on the stairs and flashing the prince a sexy metal thigh, to running into Pearl or Audrey or someone from the market. People would talk. The gossip channels were sure to look into her past, and pretty soon the whole world would know that the prince had taken a cyborg to his coronation ball. He would be mortified. She would be mortified. But it didn't make it any easier when she wondered, what if she were wrong? What if Prince Kai didn't care? What if this world were different and nobody cared she was cyborg? And on top of that, lunar. Yeah, wishful thinking. Spotting the broken net screen on the apartment, she peeled herself off her chair and kneeled before it. The blank screen was just reflective enough for her to see the outline of her face and body. The tan skin of her arms contrasted with the dark steel of her hand. Denial had run its course until it had nowhere else to go. She was lunar. But she was not afraid of the mirror's surface, not afraid of her own reflection. She couldn't understand what Levana and her kind, their kind, found so disturbing about it. Her mechanical parts were the only disturbing thing about Cinder's reflection, and that had been done to her on Earth. Lunar and cyborg. And a fugitive. Did Audrey know? No, never. Audrey would never have housed a lunar. If she'd known, she would have turned Cinder in herself, probably expecting payment. Had Audrey known? Or had Audrey's husband known? That was a question Cinder would probably never know the answer to. Nevertheless, she was confident that so long as Dr. Erlin didn't say anything, her secret would be kept safe. She would just have to go on as if nothing had changed. Not like anything did. It doesn't matter what you're told what you are, it's what you make yourself to be. Oh, seeing right here. In many ways, nothing had. She was every bit an outcast as ever. A white blob caught her eye on the screen surface. Kai's android. Its lifeless sensor staring down at her from its perch on top of her desk. Its pear-shaped body was the brightest thing in the room and probably the cleanest. It reminded her of the sterile medroids in the labs and quarantines, but this machine did not have scalpels and syringes hidden in its torso. Work, mechanics. She needed the distraction. Returning to her desk, she turned on her audio interface for some tranquil background music. Kicking off her boots, she gripped both sides of the android and wheeled it toward her. After a quick examination of its external plating, she tipped the android over, laying it horizontal so that it balanced on the edge of its treads. Cinder opened the back panel and inspected the wiring throughout the cylindrical frame. It was not a complicated... Oh, page is stuck. No, page is stuck together. What is this? A romance novel? Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. That was terrible. Come on. There we go. Android. The interior was mostly hollow, a shell for housing a minimum of hard drives, wires, chips. Tutor androids required little more than a central processing unit. Cinder suspected that the android would have to be wiped and reprogrammed, but she had a feeling that wasn't a viable option. Despite Kai's nonchalance, it was clear this android knew something important, and after their conversation in the research hall, she had an uneasy feeling it had something to do with Lunars. War strategies, classified communications, evidence for blackmail? Whatever it was, Kai clearly thought it would help, and he trusted Cinder to save it. No pressure or anything, she muttered, gripping a flashlight between her teeth so she could see inside the android. She grabbed a pair of pliers and coerced the wires from one side of its cranium to the other. Excuse me. Its configuration was similar to Aiko's, so Cinder felt a familiarity with its parts, knew exactly where to find all the important connections. She checked that the wires connectors were sound, that the battery held power, that no important pieces were missing, and everything seemed fine. She cleaned out the noise translator and adjusted the internal fan, but Nancy the android remained a lifeless statue of plastic and aluminum. All dressed up with nowhere to go, said All dressed up with nowhere to go, said Aiko from the doorway. Cinder spat out the flashlight with a laugh and glanced down at her oil-stained cargo pants. Yeah, right. All I need is a tiara. I was talking about me. She spun her chair around. Aiko had draped a strand of Audrey's pearls around her bulbous head and smeared cherry lipstick beneath her sensor in a horrible imitation of lips. Cinder laughed. Wow, that color looks great on you. Do you think? Aiko wheeled her way into the room and paused before Cinder's desk, trying to catch her reflection in the netscreen. I was imagining going to the ball and dancing with the prince. Cinder rubbed her jaw with one hand and mindlessly tapped the table with the other. Funny, I've found myself imagining the exact same thing lately. Cinder rubbed her jaw with one hand and mindlessly tapped the table with the other. Oh, I already read the part. Yeah. I knew you liked him. You pretend to be immune to his charms, but I see the way you looked at him at the market. Aiko rubbed at the lipstick, smearing it across her blank white chin. Yeah, well, Cinder pinched her metal fingers with the pliers' nose. We all have our weaknesses. I know, said Aiko. Mine is shoes. Cinder tossed the tool onto her desk. Something like guilt was beginning to grow in her when Aiko was around. She knew she should tell Aiko about being lunar. That Aiko knew more than anyone would understand what it was like to be different and unwanted. But somehow she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. By the way, Aiko, it turns out I'm lunar. You don't mind, don't you? What are you doing down here? She asked instead. Just seeing if you need help. I was supposed to be dusting the air vents, but Audrey was in the bath. So? I could hear her crying. Cinder blinked. Oh. It was making me feel useless. I see. Aiko was not a normal servant android, but she did retain one prominent trait. Uselessness was the worst emotion they knew. Well, sure you can help, Cinder said, rubbing her hands together. Just don't let her catch you with those pearls. Aiko lifted the beaded necklace up with her prongs, and Cinder noticed she was wearing the ribbon Peony had given her. She pulled back as if she'd been stung. How about some light? The blue sensor brightened, shedding a spotlight into Nancy's interior. Cinder twisted up her lips. Do you think it could have a virus? Oh, do you think it could have a virus? Maybe her programming was overwhelmed by Prince Kai's uncanny hotness. Cinder flinched. Can we please not talk about the prince? I don't think that will be possible. You're working on his android after all. Just think about all the things that she knows. She's seen things and And... Aiko's voice sputtered. Do you think she's seen him in the nude? Oh, for heaven's sake. Cinder yanked her gloves off and tossed them onto the table. You're not helping. I'm just making conversation. Well, stop. Crossing her arms over her chest, Cinder pushed her chair back from the work table and swung both legs up on top of to rest them. Yeah. It has to be a software issue. She sneered to herself. Software issues usually came down to reinstallation, but that would turn the android into a blank slate. She didn't know if Kai was concerned with the android's personality chip, which had probably developed into something quite complicated after 20 years of service, but she did know Kai was concerned with something in this android's hard drive, and didn't want to risk whatever it was. The only way to determine what was wrong and if a reboot was necessary was to check the android's internal diagnostics, and that would require plugging in. Cinder hated plugging in. Connecting her wiring with a foreign object had always felt hazardous. Like if she wasn't careful, her own software could be overridden. Ooh, ominous. Chastising herself for being squeamish, she reached for the panel in the back of her head. Her fingernail caught a small latch and it swung open. What's that? Cinder stared at Aiko's outstretched prong. What's what? That chip! Cinder dropped her feet to the floor and leaned forward. She squinted into the far back of the model where a tiny row of chips stood like soldiers along the bottom of the control panel. There were 20 plugs in all, but only 13 of them were full. Manufacturers always left plenty of room for add-ons and updates. Aiko had spotted the 13th chip, and she was right. Something was different about it. It was tucked far enough behind the other chips that it was easy to miss with a cursory glance, but when Cinder targeted it with the flashlight, it gleamed like polished silver. Cinder shut the panel on the back of her own head and called up the digital blueprint of the android's model on her retina. According to the manufacturer's original plans, this model only came with 12 chips, but surely after 20 years, the android would have received at least one add-on. Surely the palace had access to the newest, finest programs available. Still, Cinder had never seen a chip quite like that. She pressed a fingernail into the release switch and gripped the edge of the silver chip with pliers. It slid like grease from its plug. Cinder held it up for closer inspection. With the exception of a pearlescent, shimmering finish, it looked like every other program chip she's ever seen. Flipping it over, she saw the letters DCOM engraved on the other side. Is that so? She lowered her arm. What is that? Or no, what is it? Said Aiko. A direct communication chip. Cinder furrowed her brow. Almost all communication was done through the net. Direct communication that bypassed the net entirely was practically obsolete. It was slow and had a tendency to lose connection in the middle of a link. She supposed paranoid types who required absolute privacy would find direct comms appealing, but even then, they would use a port or a net screen, a device that was set up for it. Using an android as one side of the link didn't make any sense. Aiko's light dimmed. My database informs me that androids have not come equipped with direct communication abilities since 89 TE. Well, that would explain why it didn't work with her programming. Cinder held the chip toward Aiko. Can you run a material scan? See what it's made out of? Aiko backed away. Absolutely not. Having a mental breakdown is not on my list of things to do today. It doesn't seem like it would have caused her to malfunction, though. Wouldn't the system have just rejected it? Cinder angled the chip back and forth, mesmerized by how its reflective surface caught Aiko's light. Unless she tried to send information over the direct link, it could have jammed up with bandwidth. Standing, Cinder strolled across the storage space toward the net screen. Though its frame had been shattered, the screen and controls seemed undamaged. She slid the chip in and pressed the power button, having to jab it harder than usual before a pale green light came to life before the drive, and the screen flared bright blue. A spiral in the corner announced that it was reading the new chip. Cinder released her breath and folded her legs beneath her. A second later, the spiral disappeared, replaced with text. Hang on, I need to drink water before this part. I've got so many books. This series is so freaking good. I'm excited to see what's on this chip. Oh my god. Who would need a direct communication to Prince Kai? Initiating direct link with unknown user. Please wait. Initiating direct link with unknown user. Please wait. Initiating direct link with unknown user. Please wait. Cinder waited and wiggled her foot and waited and drummed her fingers against her knee and began to wonder if she were wasting her time. She'd never heard of a direct communication chip hurting anything, even if the technology was archaic. This wasn't helping her solve the problem. I guess no one's home, said Aiko, rolling up behind her. Her fan turned on, blowing warm air on Cinder's neck. Oh, drat. Oh, drat! Adria's calming me. She must be out of the bath. Cinder tilted her head back. Thanks for your help. Don't forget to take those pearls off before you see her. Tilting forward, Aiko pressed her flat, cool face to Cinder's brow, no doubt leaving a smudge of lipstick. Cinder laughed. You'll find out what's wrong with His Highness's android. I don't doubt it. Thanks. Cinder rubbed her clammy palm on her pants, listening as Aiko's treads got further away. The text continued to repeat across the screen. It seemed whoever was on the other side of the link had no intention of answering. A series of clicks startled her, followed by telltale humming. She turned around, propping her knuckles on the gritty floor. The android's control panel was glowing as the system ran through its routine diagnostic. It was turning back on. Cinder stood and dusted her hands just as a calm female voice began to emanate from the android speakers, as if it were continuing a speech that had been rudely interrupted. Pected that a man by the name of Logan Tanner, a lunar doctor who worked under the reign of Queen Channery, first brought Princess Celine to Earth approximately 4 months after her alleged death. Princess Celine is alive! Ah, more proof that Cinder is Princess Celine! No, I want this part recorded. Princess Celine is alive! I knew it! Princess Celine is alive! I knew it! Cinder froze. Princess Celine? Unfortunately, Tanner was admitted into Zhu Ming Psychiatric Hospital on 8 May 125 TE and committed bioelectric-induced suicide on 17 January 126 TE. Though sources indicate that Princess Celine had been given to another keeper years before Tanner's death, I have thus far not been able to confirm the identity of that keeper. One suspect is an ex-military pilot from the European Federation, Wing Commander Michel Benoit, who... Stop, says Cinder. Stop talking. The voice silenced. The android's head rotated 180 degrees. Its sensor flashed bright blue as it scanned Cinder. Her internal control panel dimmed. The fan in her torso began to spin. Who are you? Said the android. My global positioning system indicates that we are in the 76th sector of New Beijing. I have no memory of leaving the palace. Cinder straddled her seat, draping her arms over the back. Welcome to New Beijing's mechanic suite. Prince Kai hired me to fix you. The loud humming in the android's torso died out until it was barely discernible, even in the quiet room. The bulbous head rotated back and forth, scanning its unfamiliar surroundings, then refocused on Cinder. My calendar tells me that I have not been conscious for over 12 days, 15 hours. Did I experience a system crash? Not exactly, said Cinder, glancing over her shoulder at the net screen. It continued to repeat the same line of text, unable to establish a direct link. It seems someone installed a comm chip that didn't meld well with your programming. I come installed with vid and text comm capabilities. A new comm chip would be unnecessary. This was for direct link. Cinder settled her chin on her wrist. Do you know if that was Prince Kai? Maybe he wanted to be able to get in touch with you without going through the net. I was unaware of the direct communication chip in my programming. Cinder chewed her lip. Clearly, the comm chip had been responsible for the android's subtle malfunction, but why? And if Kai hadn't installed it, then who had? When you just woke up now, she said, you were talking about you have information on the lunar air? That information was classified. You should not have heard it. I know, but I think you were probably communicating it with someone before you were disabled. Cinder prayed that it had been Kai or someone loyal to him. She doubted that Queen Lavana would be too happy to know that the soon-to-be emperor was searching for the rightful heir to her throne. Hold still, she reached said, reaching for a screwdriver. I'll put your panel back on and then take you to the palace. In the meantime, you should download the news broadcast from the last few days. A lot has happened since you've been out. Princess Selena's alive! I knew it! Oh, I told you! Oh, I knew I was right! Oh, shit! Oh, shit, dude! Oh, shit! But then who put the direct comm thing in her? If it wasn't Prince Kai, was it Torin? Was Torin doing some typical evil advisor stuff? Like, what the hell? What happened? Yo, this is fucking wild, man! Yo! Oh my god! Chapter 22. Cinder could hear Dr. Erlin's warnings in her head, echoing like a damaged audio file the entire 6 miles to the palace. Queen Lavanna will stop at nothing to ensure her control, to terminate any resistance. That means killing those who would resist her, people like you. If she were to see you, she would kill you. And yet, if something were to happen between the apartment and the palace to this android who had real information on the missing lunar princess, Cinder would never forgive herself. It was her responsibility to get the android back to Kai, safe and sound. Besides, the palace was a huge place. What were the chances she would run into the Lunar Queen, who probably didn't intend to spend much time socializing with the citizenry anyway? Nancy was much faster on her treads than Aiko, and Cinder had to hurry up to keep with her. But their pace slowed as they discovered that they were not the only citizens on their way to the palace that afternoon. At the base of the cliff, the main road had been blocked off as it left the city behind and became the private driveway of the palace, shaded by twisted pines and drooping willows. The winding street was filled with pedestrians making their slow way up the hill. Some walked alone, others in large cliques. Their conversations reached Cinder, irate and determined, arms flying in mad gestures. We don't want her here. What could His Highness be thinking? The growing roar of the mob echoed down the road. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of angry voices chanting in unison. No Moon Queen! No Moon Queen! No Moon Queen! Turning to the last corner, Cinder's gaze fell upon the crowd up ahead, filling up the courtyard before the palace's maroon gates and spilling down the street. It was barely contained by a flustered row of security guards. Signs bobbed over their heads. War is better than slavery. We need an empress, not a dictator. No alliance with evil. Many included the queen's veiled image slashed through with red X's. Nice. Half a dozen news hovers circled the sky, capturing footage of the protests for global broadcasting. Cinder skirted the edge of the crowd, shoving her way to the main gate while trying to shield Nancy's compact body with her own. But upon reaching the gate, she found it closed and guarded by both humans and androids, standing shoulder to shoulder. Pardon me, she said to the closest guard. I need to get into the palace. The man now stretched his arm toward her, pushing her back a step. No entrance to the public today. But I'm not with them, she placed her hands on Nancy's head. This android belongs to His Imperial Highness. I was hired to fix her, and now I'm returning her. It's very important that she be returned to him as soon as possible. The guard peered down his nose at the android. Did His Imperial Highness give you a pass? Well, no, but... Does the android have its ID? I do. Rotating her torso, Nancy flashed her ID code at the guard. The guard nodded. You may enter. The gates opened, just barely, and it wasn't a breath before the crowd surged forward. Cinder cried out at the rumble of angry voices in her ears and the sudden crush of bodies shoving her into the security guard. Nancy rolled through the gate without hesitation, but when Cinder moved to slip through behind her, the guard blocked her with his arm, straining against the crowd. Just the android. But we're together! But we're together! She yelled over the chanting. No pass, no entrance. But I fixed her! I need to deliver her! I need to collect payment! Even she was off-put by the whining in her voice. Send your invoice to the treasury like everyone else, the man said. No one is admitted without an issued pass. Lin Mei, said Nancy from the other side of the iron gate. I will inform Prince Kai that you would like to see him. I'm sure he can calm you an official pass. Instantly, Cinder felt the weight of her silliness. Of course she didn't need to see the prince. She had delivered the android. Her job was done, but she wasn't really going to bill him for her work anyway. But Nancy had turned away and rolled off toward the palace's main entrance before Cinder could protest, leaving Cinder trying to come up with a reasonable excuse as to why it was so important to see Kai. Something better than the very stupid, very childish reason that first entered her head. She simply wanted to. The chanting stopped suddenly, making Cinder jump. The crowd's silence created a Oh, fuck. Oh, it's because Queen Lavon is there. That's why they stopped chanting. Oh. The crowd's silence created a vacuum on the street, yearning to fill with breath, with sound, with anything. Cinder looked around at the dazzled faces turned upward toward the palace. At the lower signs held in limp fingers, a ripple of fear stroked through her spine. She followed the gazes of the crowd up to the balcony that jutted from one of the palace's high stories. The Lunar Queen stood with one hand on her hip, the other on the balcony's railing. Her expression was stern, bitter, but the look did nothing to dispel her uncanny beauty. Even from afar, Cinder could make out the pale luminescence of her skin, the ruby tinge of her lips. Her dark eyes were scanning the silenced crowd, and Cinder shrank away back from the gate, wanting to disappear behind the empty faces. But the shock and terror were short-lived. This woman was not frightening, not dangerous. She was warm, welcoming, generous. She should be their queen. She should rule them, guide them, protect them. Cinder's retina display flashed a warning at her. She tried in vain to wink it away, annoyed by the distraction. She wanted to look upon the queen forever. She wanted the queen to speak, to promise peace and security, wealth and comfort. But I thought that because she's lunar in the shell baby that it doesn't work on her. The orange light beamed in the corner of her vision. It took Cinder a moment to realize what it was, what it meant. She knew it was out of place. She knew it didn't make sense. Lies. She squeezed her eyes shut. When she looked up again, the illusion of goodness had faded. The queen's sweet smile had turned haughty and controlling. Cinder's stomach curled. She was brainwashing them. She had brainwashed her. Cinder stumbled back a step, colliding with a senseless middle-aged man. The queen's gaze jerked toward them, focusing on Cinder. A wash of surprise flashed over her face. Then hatred. Disgust. Cinder flinched, wanting to hide. Cold fingers clamped over her heart. She was compelled to run, yet her legs had melted beneath her. Her retina display was drawing confused lines over her vision as if it couldn't stand to look upon the queen's glamour for a moment longer. She felt naked and vulnerable, all alone in the brainwashed crowd. She was sure the earth beneath her feet would open up and swallow her whole. She was sure the queen's gaze would turn her into a pile of ashes on a cobblestone road. The queen's glower darkened until Cinder began to feel that, tear ducts or not, she would burst into tears. But then the queen spun away, her shoulders back as she stormed into the palace. With the queen gone, Cinder expected the crowd to take up their protests again, even angry that she dared to show herself. But they didn't. Slowly, as if sleepwalking, the crowd began to depart. Those with signs let them fall to the ground, to be trampled and forgotten. Cinder pulled back against the wall bordering the palace, out of the way as the citizens meandered past. So this was the effect of the lunar glamour, the spell to enchant, to deceive, to turn one's own heart toward you and against your enemies. And amid all these people who despised the Lunar Queen, Cinder seemed to be the only one who had resisted her. And yet she hadn't resisted her. Not at first. Gooseflesh covered her arms. Her skin ached where it melted with metal. She had not been entirely immune to the glamour, the way the shells were supposed to be. Worse still, the queen had seen her, and she had known. Oh my god! She knows. Oh, she knows. So what I'm wondering is we're about to go into chapter 23. Adding more credence to the Cinder as Princess Celine theory. What if the car crash that she was in was meant to look like Cinder died? Or Celine died? Because, like, someone found out that Celine was kept alive. And then they had to get in the car crash just to make it seem like Celine died. And then gave the ID chip for Lynn Cinder. And let her grow up with a new identity. Weirder still is, why did Queen Lavana's powers affect Cinder? Maybe because she grew up on Earth instead of on the moon? Or maybe because she's really convinced that she's an Earthling and is unaware of her lunar powers. Chapter 23. Kai dug his fingernails into his knees when the chanting of the protesters ceased. Torin turned toward him, their expressions mirrors of surprise, though Torin was quicker to disguise it. The Queen's success at calming the crowd had been far too easy. Kai had hoped for at least a hint of a struggle from the citizens. Gulping, Kai morphed his face back into collectedness. "It is a most useful trick," said Sybil, sitting on the edge of the chase lounge by the holographic fire, "particularly when dealing with unruly citizens, which are never tolerated on Luna." "I've heard that when citizens are unruly, there's usually a good reason for it," said Kai. Torn flashed him a warning frown, but he ignored it. "And brainwashing doesn't exactly seem like the proper solution." Sybil folded her hands politely in her lap. "Proper is such a subjective word. The solution is effective, and that can hardly be argued with." Lavanna flew back into the parlor with clenched fists. Kai's pulse ratcheted when the Queen's glare fell on him. Being in her presence was like sitting in a confined room that was quickly running out of oxygen. "It would appear," she said, carefully enunciating each word, "that you are in violation of Interplanetary Agreement of 54TE Article 17. Kai tried his best to remain neutral under her accusation, but he couldn't keep a twitch from developing above his right eye. "I'm afraid I do not have the Interplanetary Agreement memorized in full. Perhaps you could enlighten me as to the article in question." She took a slow breath through flared nostrils. Even then, even with all the hatred and anger smeared across her face, she was stunning. "Article 17 states that no party of the agreement shall knowingly shelter or protect lunar fugitives." "Oh, fuck, she knows!" "Lunar fugitives?" Kai glanced at Torin, but his advisor's face was neutral. "Why would you think we're sheltering lunar fugitives?" "Because I've just seen one in your courtyard, along with those insolent protesters. This will not be tolerated." Kai stood and folded his arms over his chest. "This is the first I've ever heard of lunars in my country. Present company excluded, of course." "Which leads me to believe that you've been turning a blind eye to the problem, just as your father did." "How can I turn a blind eye to something I've never heard of?" Torin cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I can assure you we monitor all spacecrafts coming to and leaving the Commonwealth. Though we can't deny the possibility of some lunars being smuggled in under our radar, I can promise that we've done everything in our power to comply with the Interplanetary Agreement. Besides, even if a lunar fugitive had come to reside in the Commonwealth, it seems unlikely that they would choose to risk being discovered by coming to a protest where they knew you would be present. Perhaps you have been mistaken." The Queen's eyes smoldered. "I know my own when I see them, and right now there is one in the city walls." She pointed a finger toward the balcony. "I want her found and brought to me." "Right," said Kai. "That'll be no problem in a city of 2.5 million people. Let's just go dig out my special lunar detector, and I'll get right on that." Lavanna tilted her head back so she could peer down her nose at Kai, even though he was taller than she was. "You do not wish to try my patience with your sarcasm, young prince." He flexed his jaw. If you are incapable of finding her, then I will have a regiment of my own guards dispersed to Earth, and they will find her." "That will not be necessary," said Torin. "We apologize for doubting you, Your Majesty, and are eager to fulfill our country's part of the agreement. Please allow us time to prepare for the coronation and the festival, and we will begin our search for the fugitive as soon as resources allow." Lavanna narrowed her eyes at Kai. "Do you intend to always let your advisor make your decisions for you?" "No," said Kai, allowing a cold smile. "Eventually I'll have an empress for that." Queen Lavanna's gaze softened, and Kai barely bit back his next words. "And it won't be you." "Fine," said Lavanna, turning away and seating herself beside her thaumaturge. "I will expect her, along with any other lunar fugitives in the country, delivered to Luna 1 moon cycle after your coronation." "Fine," said Kai, hoping that Lavanna would forget this conversation before the time came. Lunars in New Beijing. He'd never heard anything so absurd. The anger vanished so completely from Lavanna's face that it seemed that the past few minutes had been a dream. She crossed her legs so that the slit in her sheer dress displayed a swath of milk-white skin. Kai set his jaw and stared out the window, not knowing if he was going to blush or gag. "Speaking of your coronation," said the Queen, "I have brought you a gift." How thoughtful, he said, deadpanned. Yes, I wasn't sure if I should save it for the big night, but I've determined that it might give the wrong impression if I were to withhold it. Unable to deny his piqued curiosity, Kai eyed the queen. Is that so? He inclined her head. She inclined her head. Auburn curls cascaded over her bosom, and extended her finger toward her second thaumaturge, the man in the red coat. He produced a glass vial, no larger than Kai's pinky finger, from his sleeve, and placed it on Levana's palm. I wanted you to know, said Levana, that I have a very keen interest in the welfare of the Commonwealth, and watching your struggle with the leishmaniasis disease has been heartbreaking. Kai dug his nails into his palms. You are probably not aware, but I have had a research team dedicated to studying the disease for some years now, and it appears that my scientists have finally discovered an antidote. Don't trust that shit. Don't trust that shit. No, dude. Don't trust that. Break that shit. What? Blood rushed to Kai's head. What? Levana pinched the vial between her thumb and forefinger and held it out to him. This should be enough to cure one adult male, she said, then clicked her tongue. Awful timing, isn't it? The world spun. Kai's fingers itched to reach out and strangle her until his arms were shaking. Go ahead, said Levana, a persistent warmth behind her gaze. Take it. Kai snatched the vial away from her. How long have you had this? The queen's brow arched upward. Why, it was only confirmed as a true antidote hours before my departure. Really? What luck? She was lying. She was not even trying to hide the fact that she was lying. Witch. Your Highness, Torin said quietly, placing a firm hand on Kai's shoulder. At first gentle, then squeezing. Warning. Kai's pulse began to filter the fantasies of murder, but only barely. Levana folded her hands in her lap. That vial is your gift. I hope you will find it helpful, young prince. I believe it is in both our interests to rid your planet of this disease. My scientists could have thousands of dosages prepared by month's end. However, such an undertaking, coupled with 6 years' worth of work and resources, has put quite a strain on my own country, and so I'm sure you'll understand the need for compensation. That will require further negotiations. Kai's lungs constricted. You would withhold this when so many are dying? It was a stupid question. She'd already withheld it long enough. What was it to her if more Earthens suffered in the meantime? You have much to learn about politics. I think you will soon discover that it is all about give and take, my dear handsome prince. His pulse pounded against his temples. He knew his face had gone red, that his anger was playing right into her game, but he didn't care. How dare she use this as a political bargaining chip? How dare she? Sybil stood silently. We have a guest. Releasing a pent-up breath, Kai allowed Sybil's gaze to the doorway, glad to look away from the queen, and gasped, Nancy! Nancy's sensor flashed. Your Highness, I apologize for my interruption. Kai shook his head, trying to dispel his surprise. How? When? My consciousness had been restored 1 hour and 47 minutes, said the android. I am now reporting for duty. Might I offer my condolences on the timely loss of Emperor Riken? My heart is broken from the news. Kai heard Queen Levana snort behind him. The idea that a pile of metal could... Oh, see, I don't want to get in the same voice. The idea that a pile of metal could experience emotion is insulting. Send this monstrosity away. That's Queen Levana. Anyway. Kai pursed his lips, having a number of choice words to say about her heartlessness, but instead he turned to Torin. Indeed, let me remove this monstrosity from Her Majesty's presence and have her reinstated into active status. He half expected Torin to chastise him for the sorry escape plan, but Torin seemed too relieved that the argument was over. Kai noticed he'd gone pale and wondered how hard it had been for Torin to dominate his own temper. Of course. Perhaps Her Majesty would like a tour of the gardens. Kai glared at Queen Levana, filling the look with loathing, and clipped his heels together. Thank you for your considerate gift, he said with a short bow. It was my pleasure, Your Highness. Kai left the room with Nancy at his side. When they had reached the main corridor, he released a guttural scream and slammed his fist into the nearest wall, then fell against it, pressing his forehead against the plaster. When his breath was manageable, he turned around, suddenly wanting to cry. From anger, from desperation, from relief. Nancy was back. You can't imagine how happy I am to see you. So it appears, Your Highness. Kai shut his eyes. You don't even know. The past few days, I was sure our research would be lost. All records seem to be intact, Your Highness. Good. We need to get back to the search right away. It's more important now than ever. He struggled to contain the panic clawing at his insides. His coronation was still 9 days away. Queen Lavanna had not been on Earth for 24 hours, and she'd already turned their alliance negotiations upside down. What other secrets could she reveal before his coronation, when the role to protect his country would truly fall to him? His head pounded. He despised her for everything she was, for everything she'd done, for how she'd turned Earth's surface suffering into a game of politics. But she was wrong if she expected him to become her pupil, or puppet. He would defy her for as long as he could, in any way that he could. He would find Princess Celine. Dr. Erland would duplicate the antidote. He wouldn't even dance with Lavanna at the stupid ball if he could help it. To hell with diplomacy. Remembering the ball suddenly parted the storm of clouds in Kai's thoughts. Opening one eye, he peered down at the android. Why didn't the mechanic come with you? She did, said Nancy. I left her waiting outside the palace. She was not allowed entrance without an official pass. Outside the palace? Is she still there? I suspect so, Your Highness. Kai squeezed the vial in his pocket. I don't suppose she said anything about the ball. If she changed her mind? She did not mention any ball. Right. Well. Gulping, he freed his hands from his pockets and rubbed his palms down the side of his pants, realizing how hot his bottled anger had made him. I really hope she has. Chapter 24, baby. I'm curious. Okay, all right. So Queen Lavanna has an antidote. I don't trust that shit. First off, all right. I really don't. I don't. The last thing I trust is Queen Lavanna's antidote, because that shit, maybe it like puts Earthens down or something. Or no, assuming Queen Lavanna is as twisted as she is, it actually is the real antidote. She's just using Kai's hatred and disgust for her to trick him into thinking that's actually not the damn thing. Oh, but she let Emperor Riken die because she knew that it would be easier to manipulate Kai without the fucking Emperor in the way. Oh, okay, right. So we know this. We know this to be true. Oh my God. So she let the Emperor die as a political power move. I mean, anyone would. Fuck, I would. That's actually really smart. So what else is she gonna hide up her sleeves? And now has guards looking for Cinder, because she saw Cinder. Oh God, Cinder can't get close to Prince Kai. Prince Kai doesn't know. He just wants to go to the ball with a pretty girl. Oh, and then they're gonna meet at the ball, and then they're gonna fight, maybe, or I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen, because they're gonna have to meet. It's gonna have to come to a climax. There's no like in between on this. They have to meet. Chapter 24. It starts with a sip of water. Chapter 24. Cinder crouched against the wall that bordered the palace, the coolness from the stones soaking into her t-shirt. The crowd had gone, the only memory of them left in trampled signs. Even the guards abandoned the courtyard, though the intricate iron gate remained locked. The two stone Quilin, I don't know, were perched above Cinder's head, occasionally sending out a magnetic pulse that hummed in her ears. Her hand had finally stopped trembling. The warnings across her vision had finally disappeared, but the confusion remained persistent as ever. She was Lunar. Fine. She was a rare breed of Lunar, a shell, who couldn't twist the thoughts and emotions of others, and was immune to the tampering herself. Fine. But why did Lavanna's glamour affect her the same as everyone else? Either Dr. Erland was wrong, or he was lying. Maybe she wasn't Lunar at all, and he'd been mistaken. Maybe her immunity was due to something else. She released a frustrated groan. Never had the curiosity to know her background, her history had been so intense. She needed to know the truth. The humming of the gates on their buried tracks startled her. Cinder looked up, spotting a pristine white android rolling toward her on the cobblestones. Lynn Cinder? It held out a scanner. Blinking, she clambered to her feet, braced against the wall for support. Yes? She said, extending her wrist. The scanner beeped, and without having to come to a complete stop, the android turned its torso 180 degrees and started rumbling back toward the palace. Follow me. Wait, what? Her gaze darted fearfully up toward the balcony where the Lunar Queen had stood. His Imperial Highness has requested a word with you. Checking her gloves, Cinder cast a look toward the road that would take her away from the palace, back to the safety of being an invisible girl in a very big city. Releasing a slow breath, she turned and followed the android. The call to adventure! The palace's elaborate two-story entry doors were gilded in gold and nearly blinding with the sun glinting off their sheen as they opened. The lobby beyond was blessedly cool and filled with grand jade sculptures, exotic flowers, the voices of footsteps of dozens of harried diplomats and government employees, combined with the calming song of bubbling water. But Cinder had hardly noticed any of it. She was filled with panic at the possibility of finding herself face-to-face with Queen Lavanna, until she found herself face-to-face with Prince Kai instead. She was waiting against a carved pillar. He straightened when he saw her and almost smiled, but not one of his brilliant, carefree smiles. In fact, he looked exhausted. Cinder bowed her head. Your Highness. Lin Mei, Nancy told me you were waiting. They weren't letting people into the palace. I just wanted to be sure she got to you all right. She tucked her hands behind her. I hope your national security issues will be resolved soon. Cinder attempted a lightness in her voice, but Kai's expression seemed to falter. He dropped his gaze to the android. That will be all, he said, and waited until the android had disappeared into an alcove by the entrance before continuing. I apologize for taking up your time, but I wanted to thank you personally for fixing her. She shrugged. It was an honor. I hope you'll find what you're looking for. Kai's gaze squinted suspiciously, and he glanced over his shoulder as two well-dressed women passed by, one talking animatedly, the other nodding in agreement, neither paying Cinder and Kai any attention. When they had passed, Kai let out a breath and turned back to her. Something's come up. I need to go talk to Dr. Erland. Cinder nodded in understanding, perhaps too forcefully. Of course, she said, backing away toward the massive doors. Now that Nancy's back, I'll just... Would you like to walk with me? She paused mid-step. Excuse me? You can tell me what you found. What was wrong with her? She wrung her hands, unsure if the tingling on her skin was delight or something closer to dread. The knowledge of the Queen's presence lingered, unavoidable. Still, she found herself fighting down a stupid grin. Sure, of course. Kai seemed relieved as he cocked his head toward a wide corridor. So, what was wrong with her? He said as they made their way through the majestic lobby. A chip, she said. The direct communication chip interrupted her power connection, I think. Removing it was all it took to wake her up. Direct communication chip? Cinder scanned the people milling around them, none of whom seemed at all interested in the Crown Prince. Nevertheless, she lowered her voice when she answered. Right, the decom. Didn't you install it? He shook his head. No, we use decoms for international conferencing, but besides that, I don't think I've ever seen one. Why would someone put one in an android? Cinder pressed her lips, thinking of the things Nancy had been saying when she'd woken. Nancy had probably been relaying that same information when she'd gone unconscious, most likely over the direct communication link. But who had received it? Cinder? She pulled on the hem of her glove. She wanted to tell him that she knew about his research, that someone else probably knew too, but she couldn't say anything in the middle of crowded palace corridors. Someone must have had access to her right before she malfunctioned in order to install the chip. Why would anyone want to install a faulty chip in the first place? I don't think it was entirely faulty. It does seem that some data was sent over the link before Nancy shut down. What? Kai hesitated. Cinder noticed the nervousness in his eyes, the tensing of his posture. He craned his head closer to her, barely slowing his pace. What kind of information can be sent over direct comms? Anything that can be sent over the net. But if someone was accessing her remotely like that, they couldn't... I mean, she would have to allow access to any information they received, right? Cinder opened her mouth, paused, closed it again. I don't know. I'm not sure how a direct comm would function in an android, especially one that wasn't equipped for it in the first place. But there's a chance that whoever put that chip in her was hoping to gather information. Possibly specific information. Kai's gaze was distant as they crossed an enclosed glass bridge into the research wing. So how do I find out who put that chip in her and what they learned? Cinder gulped. I tried to initiate the link, but it seemed to have been disabled. I'll keep trying, but at this point I have no way of knowing who is on the other end, and as for what they learned. Man, it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of reading, and when you're doing a lot of reading out loud, you have to drink a lot of water. Majima. Kiryu-chan! Anyway, I love Majima. Catching on to the hint in her tone, Kai stopped walking and turned to face her, eyes burning. Cinder lowered her voice, speaking in a rush. I know what it is you were looking for. I heard some of the information Nancy had discovered. I don't even know what she's discovered yet. She nodded. It's interesting. His gaze brightened and he inched towards her, craning his neck. She's alive, isn't she? Does Nancy know where to find her? Cinder shook her head, fear clawing at her, knowing that Lavana was somewhere in these very walls. We can't talk about this here, and Nancy will know more than I do anyway. Kai frowned and stepped back, but she could see his thoughts still churning as he proceeded to the elevator bank and gave directions to the android there. So, he said, folding his arms while they waited, you tell me that Nancy has some important information, but some unknown person may also have that information. I'm afraid so, said Cinder. Also, the chip itself was unusual. It wasn't silicone or carbon. It was like no chip I'd seen before. Kai peered at her, brows knit. How so? Cinder held up her fingers as if pinching the chip between them, envisioning it. Size and shape, it looked just like a normal chip, but it was kind of shimmery, like tiny gemstones. Pearlescent, kind of. The color drained from Kai's face. A second later, he shut his eyes with a grimace. A lunar. What? Are you sure? Their ships are made of the same stuff. I'm not sure what it is, but... He cursed, kneading his thumb across his temple. It must have been Sybil, or her guard. They arrived days before Nancy broke down. Sybil? Lavana's thaumaturge, the minion that does all her dirty work. Cinder felt like a clamp was suffocating her lungs. If the information had gone to the Sybil, it had most certainly gone to the Queen. Elevator B for His Imperial Highness, said the android as the doors of the second elevator opened. Cinder followed Kai into it, unable to resist glancing up at the camera on the ceiling. If Lunars had infiltrated a royal android, they could have infiltrated anything in the palace. She brushed a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. I'm wide awake, but that was weird. Her paranoia forcing her to act normal as the doors closed. I take it things aren't going too well with the Queen? Kai grimaced as if it were the most painful topic in the world and fell back against the wall. Cinder's heart stirred, watching as his royal demeanor slid off him. She dropped her gaze to her toes off her boots. I don't think it's possible to hate anyone as much as I hate her. She's evil. Cinder flinched. Do you think it's safe to... I mean, if she put this chip in your android... Understanding flickered over Kai's face. He looked up at the camera, then shrugged. I don't care. She knows I hate her. Trust me, she's not very hard to change that. Cinder licked her lips. I saw what she did to the protesters. She nodded. I shouldn't have let her face them. Once it gets on the net screens about how fast she controlled them, the city will be chaos. He folded his arms, crunching up his shoulders towards his ears. Plus, now she's under the impression that we're intentionally harboring lunar fugitives. Her heart skipped. Really? I know, it's absurd. The last thing I want is some more power-hungry lunars running rampant in my country. Why would I... it's so frustrating. Cinder rubbed her arms, suddenly nervous. She was the reason Lavana believed Kai was harboring lunars. She hadn't considered that being noticed by the Queen could put Kai in jeopardy too. When Kai fell silent, she risked a glance up at him. He was staring at her hands. Cinder snapped them against her chest, checking the gloves, but they were fine. Do you ever take those off? He asked. No. Kai tilted his head, peering at her as if he could see right through the metal plate in her hand. The intensity of his gaze didn't mellow. I think you should go to the ball with me. She clutched her fingers. His expression was too genuine, too sure. Her nerves tingled. Stars, she muttered. Didn't you already ask me that? I'm hoping for a more favorable answer this time, and I seem to be getting more desperate by the minute. How charming. Kai's lips twitched. Please? Why? Why not? I mean, why me? Kai hooked his thumbs into his pockets. So if my escape hover breaks down, I'll have someone on hand to fix it? She rolled her eyes and found herself unable to look at him again, staring instead at the red emergency button beside the doors. I mean, I can't go alone, and I really can't go with Lavana. Well, there's about 200,000 single girls in this city who would fall over themselves to have the privilege. A hush passed between them. He wasn't touching her, but she could feel his presence. Warm and overpowering. She could feel the elevator growing hot, despite the fact that her temperature gauge assured her it hadn't changed. Cinder. She couldn't help it. She looked at him. Her defenses withered a bit upon encountering the openness in his brown eyes. His confidence had been replaced with worry, uncertainty. 200,000 single girls, he said. Why not you? Cyborg, lunar, mechanic. She was the last thing he wanted. She opened her lips, and the elevator stopped. I'm sorry, but trust me, you don't want to go with me. Come on, Cinder! Stop! Stop fucking doing it! Stopping it! Fucking... Cinder! Cinder! You stop that. Go to the ball with the prince. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. The doors opened and the tension released her. She rushed out of the elevator, head down, trying not to look at the small group of people waiting for an elevator. Come to the ball with me. She froze. Everyone in the hallway froze. Cinder turned back. Kai was still standing in elevator B, one hand propping open the door. Her nerves were frazzled, and all the emotions of the past hour were converging into a single sickening feeling, exasperation. The hall was filled with doctors, nurses, androids, officials, technicians, and they all fell into an awkward hush and stared at the prince and the girl in the baggy cargo pants he was flirting with. Flirting. Squaring her shoulders, she retreated back into the elevator and pushed him inside, not even caring that it was with her metal hand. Hold the elevator, he said to the android as the doors shut them in. He smiled. That got your attention. Listen, she said, I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't go to the ball with you. You just have to trust me on that. He gazed down at the gloved hand splayed across his chest. Cinder pulled away, crossing her arm over her chest. Why? Why don't you want to go with me? She huffed. It's not that I don't want to go with you. It's that I'm not going at all. So you do want to go with me. Cinder locked her shoulders. It doesn't matter. I can't. But I need you. Need me? Yes, don't you see? If I'm spending all my time with you, then Queen Lavana can't really be into conversations or... dancing. Cinder reeled back, her gaze losing focus. Queen Lavana. Of course this was about Queen Lavana. What had Peony told her ages ago? Rumors of a marriage alliance? Not that I have anything against dancing. I can dance if you want to dance. She squinted at him. What? Or not, if you don't want to, or if you don't know how, which is nothing to be ashamed of. She started to rub her forehead, a headache developing, but stopped when she realized her gloves were filthy. I really, really can't go, she said. You see, I don't have a dress. Audrey won't allow it, because Queen Lavana would kill me. It's my sister. Your sister? She wet her throat and dropped her gaze to the polished blackwood floor, and even the elevators were exquisite in the palace. Yes, my little sister. She has the plague, and it just wouldn't be the same without her, and I can't go, won't go. I'm sorry. Cinder was surprised to find the words ringing true, even to her ear. She wondered if her lie detector would have gone off if it could see her. Kai slipped back against the wall, hair fringing in his eyes. No, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You couldn't have. Cinder rubbed her palms down her sides. Her skin had grown hot beneath the gloves. Actually, there's something I'd like to tell you, if that's all right. He lifted his head, curious. I just think she'd like to know she'd like you to know about her is all. Her name is Peony. She's 14 and she's madly in love with you. His eyebrows rose. I just thought that if, by some crazy miracle, she might survive. Do you think you could ask her to dance at the ball? Cinder's voice chafed her throat as she said it, knowing that crazy miracles didn't happen. But she had to ask. Kai's gaze burned into her, and he gave her a slow, determined nod. It would be my pleasure. She dipped her head. I'll let her know to look forward to it. If Peony dies and doesn't get to go to the ball, I'm going to be upset, and I'm burning this book. From the edge of her gaze, Cinder saw Kai slip a hand into his pocket and ball into a fist. People are probably suspicious out there, said Cinder. The rumors will be spreading like mad. She put an awkward chuckle into the statement, but Kai didn't match it. When she dared to look up at him, he was staring unfocused at the panel wall behind her, his shoulders heavy. Are you all right? He started to nod, but stopped. Lavana thinks she can play me like a puppet. His brow creased. And it just occurred to me that she might be right. Oh, so Kai thinks that Cinder is... Oh, Cinder, you dumb bitch, you played yourself. Cinder fidgeted with her gloves. How easy it was to forget that who she was speaking to, and all the things he must have on his mind. Things so much more important than her. Even more important than Peony. Cinder, stop it! Stop overthinking! I feel like I'm going to ruin everything. You won't. She itched to reach out towards him, but held back, wringing her hands. You're going to be one of those emperors that everyone loves and admires. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean it. Look how much you care, how hard you're trying, and you're not even emperor yet. Besides, she folded her arms, baring her hands. It's not like you're alone. You have advisors, and province reps, and secretaries, and treasurers, and... I mean, really, how much harm can one man possibly do on his own? Kai half laughed. You're not really making me feel better, but I appreciate the effort. He raised his eyes to the ceiling. I shouldn't be telling you all this anyway. It isn't your problem to worry about. It's just you're easy to talk to. She shuffled her feet. It's kind of my problem. I mean, we all have to live here. You could move to Europe. You know, I've actually been considering that lately. Kai laughed, the warmth returning to the sound. If that's not a vote of confidence, I don't know what is. She ducked her head. Look, I know you're royalty and all, but people are probably getting really impatient for this Her breath snagged as Kai leaned forward, so close she was sure for a heartbeat that he meant to kiss her. She froze, a wave of panic crashing into her, and barely managed to look up. Instead of kissing her, he whispered, Imagine there was a cure, but finding it would cost you everything. It would completely ruin your life. What would you do? The warm air enclosed her. So close she could catch a faint, soapy smell coming from him. His eyes bored into hers, waiting, a tinge desperate. Cinder wet her mouth. Ruin my life to save a million others? It's not much of a choice. His lips parted. She had no choice but to look at them and then immediately back into his eyes. She could almost count the black lashes around them, but then a sadness filtered into his gaze. You're right. There's no real choice. Her body simultaneously yearned to close the gap between them and push away. The anticipation that warmed her lips made it impossible to do either. Your Highness? She tilted her face towards him, the subtlest of movements. She listened to his wavering breath, and this time it was his eyes dropping to her lips. I'm sorry. I'm sure this is horribly inappropriate, but it seems that my life is about to be ruined. Her brow drew together, questioning, but he didn't elaborate. His fingers, light as breath, brushed her elbow. He craned his head. Cinder couldn't move, barely managing to wet her lips as her eyes slipped shut. Pain exploded in her head, raced down her spine. Cinder gasped and folded over, gripping her stomach. The world lurched. Acid burned her throat. Kai cried out and caught her as she stumbled forward, easing her onto the elevator floor. Cinder shuddered against him, lightheaded. The pain was doused as quickly as it had started. Cinder lay panting, hunched over Kai's arm. His voice began to filter past her eardrums. Her name, again and again, muffled words. Are you all right? What happened? What did I do? She was hot, her hands sweating in the glove, her face burning, like before when Dr. Erland had touched her. What was happening? She licked her lips. Her tongue was cotton in her mouth. I'm all right, she said, wondering if it were true. It's gone. I'm fine. She squeezed her eyes shut and waited, afraid that the slightest movement would bring the pain back again. Kai's fingers pressed against her brow, her hair. Are you sure? Can you move? She attempted a nod and forced herself to look at him. Kai gasped and jerked away, his hands freezing inches from Cinder's brow. Fear clamped her gut. Was her retina display showing? What? She asked, ducking her face behind her hand, running nervous fingers over her skin, her hair. What is it? Nothing. When she dared meet Kai's gaze again, he was blinking rapidly. Confusion filled his eyes. Your Highness? No, it was nothing. His lips turned upward, unconvincingly. I was seeing things. He shook his head. It's nothing. Here. He stood and coaxed her up beside him. Maybe we should see if the doctor can squeeze you into his busy schedule. Oh, fuck. Oh, shit, son. Oh, he probably saw the panel in the back of her head or the glove. She knows, or Kai knows that she's a cyborg. He knows. Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Kai knows, son. Kai knows. Oh, man. Kai knows, my guy. Oh, man. I gotta finish this. How many more chapters? I want to finish this fucking book. This book is so good. 37. And we're, no, hang on, what? 38. So, 38 chapters. And we're on 25. So that leaves 13 more. Okay. We have been recording for so long. So long. I have to stop now. Okay. All right. So, where do we go from here? Okay. Let's recap. Queen Lavanna knows that Cinder is lunar. She saw her in the crowd, okay? Cinder tried to resist at first, wasn't able to, but then she could. So was able to fight off Lavanna's evil spell. Lavanna has been keeping the antidote a secret, waiting for Emperor Riken to die so she could manipulate Kai. No surprise there. Peony is still dying of the plague, so we have that going for us. Kai knows that Cinder is cyborg. Cinder knows what's going on in Kai's world, so the two worlds are mixing and matching. Why is Cinder being such a fucking... Just say yes. One night and then run away. Like, what does it matter? Fuck. It's because she thinks she's not good enough. She keeps saying, I'm lunar, I'm cyborg, I'm an outcast. Yeah, sure, but stop being so defeatist and enjoy yourself, damn it. You're never going to be happy if you don't let yourself be. Oh, shit. I'm shouting into the library. Oh, shit. They couldn't even kiss because something happened to Cinder. But what happened, I wonder? Kai said that, oh, I thought I saw something, but he knew something. And that's what's saying... Oh, the cyborg thing. But what caused Cinder to double over? Was she just like, did her like CPU overheat or something? You can't see it because it's green screen. It looks like I'm touching the library, but I'm actually touching the green screen. It's weird. Anyway. 13 more chapters. And then 6 more books. 5 more books. This book series is so fucking good. Alright. Thank you for watching. Listen. We're doing more of this. Catch you next time. Where's the fucking...